super important for forming a successful AppSec program. We're going to talk about fundamentals of forming an AppSec program, and then what are these actual practical, pragmatic steps to build the program. I'm going to share, hopefully, if we have enough time, some metrics that will help you measure the success of your program, and then we're going to go to Q&A at the end. So a lot of us attending this talk because we really want to learn how to spin up a good AppSec program. But AppSec, if you think about it, is pretty complex space, right? It's very time consuming and it's resource intensive. And there is really no one framework that can give you all the information that you need. But we know as a security practitioners, there are a lot of things that we want to get into, right? So as a security practitioner, you actually have to deal with security reviews. You have probably to spin up some scanners. Maybe there are some applications you need to do pen testing for. Maybe there is a specific part of the organization where you have to evaluate some sort of like encryption implementation, of course. And all that stuff is, if you think about it, is really part of an AppSec, right? And that's what we basically can refer to as an AppSec program or AppSec definition, which is basically all these things together, right? So it's an umbrella term that really refers to the process of finding and fixing and preventing security vulnerabilities at the application level as part of the SDL. And if you're not familiar with the SDL, it's basically the software development lifecycle. It's when you form the application or the software, you have to go through these building steps. But as someone who is basically a security journalist, and a lot of us, we were security journalists, why do you need an AppSec program? You go to your office and you start doing security reviews, you run some scans, like, why do you actually need an AppSec program? Well, according to a report from SAB, 84% of security incidents happen in the application layer. That's pretty huge number, making it the #1 attack surface for attackers. And as you probably know, if you're running an application in production, if somebody finds only one single vuln, and I'm talking about critical vulns, like somebody found remote code execution, for example, on your production server, it's done, right? Like they can jeopardize the whole security of your application. And so it's super important for us to think about AppSec as a holistic view of the security for your application. And remember, there is no application security silver bullet. And I'm not going to give you that in this talk. Hopefully, I'm going to be sharing my own experience and also give you some tips on how to form a successful AppSec program. And one thing to remember is that driving down the application risk, because really the end goal for all of us, even AppSec or non-AppSec, is really driving down the risk for your application or your organization, requires us to do both proactive and reactive processes. So the main goal of this talk is really to share perspective on how we can appropriately form this AppSec program based on both proactive and reactive processes. A lot of people frequently misunderstand AppSec, and they get confused sometimes on like, where should I start? Where should I begin? What things or frameworks should be using? And as a result of that, as you can see, that they will actually try to do security and they don't deliver the appropriate results. So they deliver like some sort of like subpar results where they don't necessarily understand all the details of what could go wrong in the application or what could go wrong in the infrastructure itself. So one thing I want to emphasize in this talk is that there is really no one correct way to build an AppSec program. And this is basically based on the experience that I had and also based on the understanding is that every company has its own problems and its own security issues. And so forming an application security would all depends on how your organization is structured and how is your organization is doing or caring about security. Like for example, Netflix don't have the concepts of gates. We have the concepts of guardrails. So, but some regulated organizations like banks, for example, they have gates because that's part of their regulations. And so hopefully in this talk, I'll really share my understanding and lessons I learned working in the AppSec field, on security field in general, in the top companies in the Silicon Valley. And hopefully this experience will be useful for people who actually wants to dive deep into the those lessons learned and apply them into the organization or the security team if you're running one. Some preliminary knowledge, I would say pretty much everyone should be familiar with this. If you're not, this is the software development cycle I mentioned earlier, which basically if you're developing a software, it has to go through planning, analysis, and design, implementation, testing, and maintenance. And we're gonna mention this SDL process along the way. All right, so let's talk about the philosophy of modern AppSec. I really like those terms of philosophy in the modern AppSec because it really gives us understanding of what things that will guide us through the process of forming an successful AppSec program. So the first thing I mentioned is don't create gates but guardrails. And developers has a lot of things to worry about, right? They have to worry about writing software, testing it, push it into production, build it, make sure it's built successfully, and it's free of bugs, right? And maybe the last thing they have to worry about is security, right? Although security is super important. So you don't want to really create gates along the way. And again, it all depends on the organization, right? Some regulated organizations require you to create gates. But generally speaking, the approach should be really to not create gates, but guardrails. And this will ensure that your developers have freedom to do the things that they want while maintaining security. And this doesn't come with by itself. It has to come with you as a security team being enablers and not gatekeepers. And when I say enablers, I mean what I mean by that is you actually want to make sure that your developers have the necessary tools for them. And I say tools, I say security tools for them to do the things that you ask them to do, right? You can't just bring a problem without a solution. You can't just tell your developer, hey, can you go and fix this problem without telling them how to fix it and maybe giving them the right tooling to fix it. So you always want to be enabler. Automation is key. I can't emphasize this enough. You, as a developer or as a security team, it's impossible to scale security by just doing hiring. And we're going to talk about that in more details. But think about this, you're working in a startup or an organization where it has hundreds, maybe thousands of microservices. You can't just hire so many people to do this work. So try to automate as much as you can. And that's a really key philosophy thing. It is impossible for you to do security day one or week one. It's just impractical, right? And you want to make sure that you're actually doing security improvements over time, and you can measure that over time as well. So it's an incremental security improvements over time. And really, this gives you the understanding that growing security over time is a marathon, is not a sprint. You can't just think about building one tool that will fix everything. You have to kind of think a holistic approach, take a holistic approach to your organization. This is very important, which is you want to provide a consistent experience to your developers. And when I say consistent experience is based on toolings that you provide them. You don't want to confuse them with so many toolings. And also you don't want to give them so many different security guidance. So make it consistent and developers will like to work with you more. And this brings us to the next one, which is think about this as a partnership with your developers. because when you're partnering with someone, that means you're both equally working on achieving the actual goal, as opposed to just telling your developer, hey, can you, like, throwing a bunch of bugs on them and just telling them to fix all of that stuff. So partnering with them, meaning you actually both work together to get to a proper security solution that will help you achieve your AppSec goal. And last but not least is always shift left. I really like the idea of shift left. We're going to talk about it in more details in a little bit. But shift left approach means you do security early in the process of the development lifecycle. So think about like scanning earlier, doing maybe some sort of IDE checking. So do security early and we'll catch things early. So it doesn't, it's fixed early. So before it goes out of the door. All right. So we talked about these philosophies. Now let's talk about some guiding principles. Again, this is not an exhaustive list, but it should help you establish a baseline. So the first thing is, don't ever squash every single bug. Try killing bug classes. I really like the idea of finding a solution that contributes massively to killing a lot of bugs, as opposed to just trying to find solutions that will fix single bugs. So if you think about some proper guiding principle, keep that in mind. And you're gonna, like, once you start working on like forming AppSec programs, you'll see a lot of things that I'm not talking about like low-hanging fruits. I'm talking about really specific bug classes that you're gonna see frequently. And so for you to be able to get rid of that, you have to think about a solution that will try to kill the whole bug classes. So instead of just have a band-aid on things, really think about creating some sort of a solution, or maybe building a library that will contribute into killing all that bug classes. I really like to advocate for immutable infrastructure and declarative CI. Immutable infrastructure means you have an infrastructure where all the changes are tracked, and basically you have a same understanding or same replicas of infrastructure across the globe, and you have a lot of differences. This way, you're actually, you know that all these instances have the same exact copy of the operating system and the libraries that are installed there. And also declarative CI, meaning you're basically tracking everything in a control version or source code version control, and you're tracking all the changes so you can actually do checkings there. Focus on rolling out paved roads. And when I say paved road, meaning really, I mentioned earlier, you want to be enablers for your developers. So really help them create tooling that will make their life easier. For example, if you're telling them all the time, hey, can you implement this authentication, or can you add authorization for your application? If you can just give them the tooling, will make their life much easier, and also will ensure that they all use the same tool across all the applications. You want to make security frictionless, and this is very important because when you ask your developer to fix a specific security problem or implement a solution, you don't want them to spend a lot of time doing it. That is going to increase their cognitive load. So you want to make sure that your tooling that you're giving to them is smooth and easy to implement and doesn't take a lot of their time. You want to create a consistent guidance between the AppSec team and developers. And when I say guidance, it's basically what the developers need to do in case they want to, for example, let's say take their app on the internet, or they want to connect their app into an infrastructure that talks to third party or vendors. So you want to make sure that you're always giving them the consistent guidance, especially if you have different people in the AppSec team given different guidance. You don't want that to happen. And you want to also catch all low-hanging fruits. And those are usually the things that get people or companies breached, unfortunately. There is no really like specific reference to this, But think about it. If you have a bunch of like RCEs on the production, remote code executions, or SQL injection issues, think about that there are a lot of script kiddies that can just run scanners on your infrastructure and find those. And you don't want that to happen, right? So try to catch all these low-hanging fruits as soon as possible. And last but not least is really define what SDL means to DevOps team. The reason I mentioned that is because working with DevOps team sometimes tends to be more of like you tell them basically what to do as opposed to partnering with them. So I really like the idea of partnering with even your DevOps team and defining what exactly are you trying to accomplish and be reasonable about your security asks. All right. So we talked about the philosophy and guiding principles. Let's spend a little bit of time here, talk about the fundamentals of forming an AppSec program. So from my own experience, fully integrating AppSec into the SDL is the major challenge. And you might think about two approaches here. One is I can just use vendor tooling and have them do all the work, which does work for a lot of companies, right? But not all the time your developer or your vendor tooling actually has a smooth integration. May require a lot of changes and may require your DevOps team to make a lot of changes. So the other thing also, you want to create some sort of like a mature development culture, right? So you don't want your organization to have so many different toolings, so many different languages, so many different frameworks. It makes it so much harder to do AppSec. And so you want to define some sort of requirements of what would be the paved road solution for web application, for example, framework. What would be the paved road solution for an authorization system? But let's talk about those fundamentals, right? Now, for you to be able to actually form a successful AppSec program, there are a couple of things you want to keep in mind. The first thing is you want to know all your assets. They always say that you can't fix what you don't know, right? So knowing all the assets in the company will allow you to quickly understand if something goes wrong, where else is this thing going wrong? If somebody finds a bug on one instance, where else is that issue can be found? And so you have a catalog of all your assets into one place. And we're going to talk about that as well. You want to determine your assets risks. You want to know what are the most riskiest assets, and so you can focus more on those things as opposed to just less riskiest assets. And you want to understand what is in your code. And when I say what's in your code, is really about understanding of what exactly is being supported, what frameworks, what libraries are being used, what third-party libraries being pulled, etc. You want to use the right tools. You don't want to spend your time thinking about using 1,000 open source tools, right? It's just not scalable and it's not maintainable. So you want to think about what is the right tool for my organization? What is the right tool for this particular part of the infrastructure? You want to also create security guidance, and security guidance is super important because you end up having so many conversations with so many people about the same thing. And so having one security guidance that you can share with all those people will help you tremendously. And seen this from previous experience where you talk to this team, they're doing something, and they talk to the other team, they're doing something similar, but they're using different security tooling or libraries. And so you have kind of make it consistent for them. You want to train your developers. A lot of people have different opinions on this, but really, you want to train your developers, but you don't expect them to be security experts. And the last but not least is the embrace security self-service. scaling AppSec is a major challenge, as we mentioned in the beginning. And so you want to put a lot of time to think about how can you actually create some sort of self-service tooling that will help your developers. And self-service can be either like a library that they can use on their own, or it could be a guidance that you're actually telling them what to do. And so they can self-serve themselves without going back and asking security team. Imagine you have a company with 2,000, 3,000, 10,000 developers, and you have 100 people in the security team. It's just not gonna scale. All right, so now we talked about philosophies, guidelines, and we touched base on the major fundamentals of forming an AppSec. Let's now talk about these steps. And again, I want to emphasize that this is not the only way that you can do AppSec, and this is just reference from my own experience. And of course, a lot of people can do things differently, but this has been showed a lot of success in major tech companies doing security or doing AppSec. So the first thing you want to do is, as I mentioned, you actually need to build an asset inventory. You want to know all your assets that exist in your organization. If you don't have an asset inventory, it's a big problem. I really like this quote from Jeremiah Grossman. He's the founder of White Hat Security. These days, the biggest AppSec risk are websites that you don't know you own. It's actually very 100% true. Imagine you are required to patch a problem like, for example, struts vulnerability, and you want to know what applications are using this struts version. If you don't have an asset inventory, you have to go and reach out to all the developers, and you might or might not get 100% coverage. But if you have 100% coverage on the asset inventory, then you can just simply query, and the query will return back all the assets that are actually using the applications that are using struts vulnerability, for example. And the nice thing about building an asset inventory is that you can use ETLs. And if you're not familiar with ETLs, is extract, transform, load. It's basically a form of data loading transformation. So basically, if you have like DNS data and you want to put this data in asset inventory, you can create some sort of ETLs that takes this data from your DNS provider, maybe Route 53, and put it into your asset inventory. Now, if you have a DNS problem, or if you want to query what this app is being used for, then you can query this DNS information and get the data back. And you can also create some sort of a graph database, so you can build relationships between all these components. You want to identify risky assets, and this is very important because you want to focus on those, and you want to focus on creating solutions and paved roads and controls over all these risky assets. And so you can determine based on the risk factors. For example, is this internet facing? Does it actually talk to payment? Does it process payment? So those are usually tends to be risky assets because, you know, as you probably know, like working, for example, at banks is regulated industry where they focus so much on payments infrastructure. And so those are always going to be risky assets as opposed to just an application that shows news. You can look at something called FAIR model. Is pretty good framework. It's FAIR stands for Factor Analysis of Information Risk, and really provides a model for you to understand and analyze and quantify cyber risks and operation risk in financial terms. So you can say if this app has ever had a remote code execution, it will cost the company, for example, $1 million, something like this. Shift left approach. We talked briefly about shift left, and you want to get all that stuff earlier in the development lifecycle. So think about having some sort of source code attestation in developers workstation. You can develop things like source code analysis and tests. SimGrip is pretty good, neat tool. that you can create some sort of checking on the code itself. You can use IDE plugins. So you can, for example, recommend to developers to use a specific library. And you can also use CLI scanners. This is part of the compilation process, especially if you're using C++. It's super important for you to catch those low-hanging like buffer overflow issues. All right. Next step is now you have dealt with the workstations and try to basically integrate shift-left approach into the security of for the developers. Now you have to kind of look at the infrastructure side of things. So if you're not familiar with a CI/CD, is continuous integration, continuous delivery infrastructure. It's basically a term that we refer to when we build an infrastructure that allows developers to push code to production without having to worry too much about the details of building and deploying. So things get really hairy when we talk about CI/CD infrastructure. Because there is just a bunch of secrets that laying around usually in those systems. And the reason for that is because all these different components has to talk to each other. So they should form some sort of identity that requires maybe API tokens or some sort of secrets that needs to talk. And I can emphasize that this secrets thing should really just die and go away. And instead, companies should form some sort of PKI system that uses mutual TLS. You want to make sure that there's least privilege. You don't want if you're running Jenkins, for example, you don't want all the developers to have access to the same Jenkins instances. This is pretty bad. Even using Jenkins is pretty bad. But like in general, if you're using a CI system that has all developers have access to, that's a problem. So you want to identify based service accounts, and those base service accounts, basically the accounts that gets created for the machinery to talk to another service. So you identify those, and usually those have some sort of secrets that make sure that it gets rotated. You want to make sure that there is secure pipeline configuration and monitoring and auditing, integrity of the build pipeline. You can do some sort of cryptographic checking to make sure that the integrity is not flawed. And last but not least is the module signing, which basically when you push a new artifact, you want to make sure that this module is signed so you know it's actually coming from the right developers. Container security is very important, and the reason I mentioned container security is because a lot of modern organizations, they use containers and orchestration like Kubernetes, and those specific type of software requires a lot of understanding of what could go wrong there. And so things like, for example, you have to look at from the AppSec perspective is really avoid, for example, privileged containers, because privileged container will allow you to escape from the actual container and to the host. And if an attacker get access there, then they can compromise the host itself. You want to remove all the dangerous Linux capabilities. It's very important to understand that when the container gets created, it inherits some Linux capabilities. So you want to make sure that you don't have that. And you want to form some sort of container network traffic monitoring. If one container gets compromised, you want to know what sort of suspicious traffic could originate from that container that you can detect it earlier. You want to actually secure the host itself, because the host is the infrastructure or the server that hosts all these containers. And so compromising that host means the attacker will compromise the whole container infrastructure. And you want to scan for malicious containers. We've seen in the past people pushing stuff onto Docker Hub that contains malicious code. You want to develop tools that helps AppSec team. And so, for example, credentials is a very important thing to think about. So develop some tooling that will help developers know how to manage credentials, and not just only how, but like some sort of like enforcement mechanisms that you can tell developers this is a library you're going to use to store secrets, and then you're going to create scanners that will detect the absence of this control. People tend to create a lot of tooling for AppSec to scan the infrastructure, but they forget to secure their own infrastructure. So one of the things, the key important thing about when you build an AppSec infrastructure is really make sure it's secure. Make sure that you're doing all the hygiene of killing the tech debt, and make sure that all your configurations are secure. The last thing you wanna end up with is having some attackers compromising your AppSec infrastructure. So just very important thing to keep in mind. You want to really leverage modern DevOps environments. So this is not exhaustive list, it's just an examples of things you can use. For example, automated pull requests. If you want to fix something, you want to ask your developer to fix something, you could just send them a pull request to fix it, and that will make their life much, much easier. This is probably easier than it's done, but just something to think about. You want to really emphasize and encourage developers to use infrastructure as code. And infrastructure as code refers to things like Terraform, HashiCorp Terraform, example of these, where you can use it to deploy and configuration changes. And it helps you because you can have all the stuff in one file. And so you can write checks, security checks, to go over specific things that might cause a security problem. So you can easily do that, and you can ensure that everything is tracked in the source code repository. One of the main things you want to do as part of forming an AppSec is develop a vulnerability management program. And vulnerability management program is one of the key things. And sometimes this forms under AppSec. Some other companies form it under different teams. But the way modern orgs, they have vuln management under AppSec. So think about all the stuff we mentioned. Create asset inventory, create some sort of repository of all the things that you want to know about, especially when it comes to OSS stuff. It's very important for you to keep track of that. Because imagine all these dependencies of libraries that get pulled when you build an application, and imagine one of them is just malicious. I gave a talk at Black Hat about that, so check out the talk on YouTube. It's about OSS, practical approach to find and remediate security issues at scale. Now, the last thing is really try to measure and evaluate and prioritize your vulnerabilities. It's impossible to fix all the vulnerabilities. So you have to think about what are the most pressing issues that you need to get your developers to fix. And usually those affect the high risky apps. And that's why you want to form some sort of identification of what are these risky assets in your organization would look like. And briefly mention about this, check out my talk about the dependency analysis and third-party libraries. This is a very important subject. You can't just ignore that, especially with modern agile development, where you have thousands of developers building thousands and millions of different libraries they pull into their application. You need to have full visibility over that. Static and dynamic analysis. Some companies prefer to use third-party tooling because this is a really hard problem to solve. And of course, the hard problem to solve is because there's a lot of false positives, basically. So SAST and DASTs are the most common things people use to identify anti-patterns or vulnerabilities in code. Static analysis looks at the actual code. Dynamic analysis doing some sort of behavior checking, or maybe at runtime when your application is running. and so it detects things as the application is running. There's a bunch of vendor tools. I can't recommend any vendor tools here because it's not advertising talk, but check out some open source stuff as well. But I really like SemGrib for like SaaS stuff because you can quickly write your own checking without having to think too much about how to do that. You want to have a bug bounty program. This is started back in 2009 and 2010, and many companies then after that started embracing this idea of bug bounty. So if you're not familiar with bug bounty, it's basically you're exchanging bugs with money for security researchers, and it encourages the responsible disclosure. So if the researcher found a bug in your organization, they can report it to you. They're not allowed to talk about it, and then in exchange, you actually give them a bounty, a reward. And it really saves money, saves you a lot of money, because you don't have to do a lot of pen testing. And also, breaches are more expensive. If company gets breached, it's very, very expensive. So the total amount of money you're paying for research is not comparable to how much you're going to pay for breaches and pen test. Most companies have actually bug bounty program. The most common platforms for bug bounty is HackerOne and Bugcrowd. They actually do the first level triaging. You want to create those tooling that you can help your developers to pave the road, and think about tooling that commonly are used across all the organization or infrastructure. Is like you want to have edge proxy, right? You can inject everything into that edge proxy from tooling perspective, scanning, web application firewalls. You want to have really a paved road tool for authentication and authorization, because the last thing you want to do is having too many authentication systems laying around, and maybe some of them are not secure enough. You want to create a security self-service, and as I said, scaling AppSec program is a major challenge. And so the thing that will allow you to scale AppSec is really create self-service that developers themselves can go and do the actual thing that you want them to do without having to refer back to you. And that can be a form of guidance or tooling or some sort of a dashboard. It also, the nice thing about self-service is actually identifies outliers in your infrastructure. So when you actually provide this self-service, when developers reach out to you, that means that specific guidance or self-service didn't meet their expectation. And so that means they are doing something that unexpected, or they are derailing from the actual paved road thing. So now you can identify all these things in your infrastructure and adapt accordingly. You want to create an on-call schedule, and somebody reports an issue on Bugcrowd, Bug Bounty, or HackerOne in the middle of the night. You need someone to get into it, right? So you want to form sort of distribution on the AppSec team where rotation can vary, right? Like maybe you have 5 or 2 or 3 members of the team. Every week you have 1 member to do on-call rotation, and so that person is on call 24 hours, 7 days a week. That doesn't mean they have to work 7 days a week, but they just have to keep their phone with them, so in case something happens, they can get paged. You want to actually create a champion program, and I'll go super fast because we only have 10 minutes left. Really, security champion allows you to scale security as well. Those champions basically act as a voice of security, and think about them as people who are interested in security, but work with your developer, work as software engineers. So you can nominate those and teach them security. And of course, those people will be the actual engineers who are interested in learning more about security. You want to connect with others doing security. This is, by having you now joining this talk is basically sort of you accomplish that. You connect with other people doing security. you want to build a strong relationship with developers. I think we briefly mentioned that about partnership. And so working with InfoSec is kind of inherently social activity. So, you know, it really like you wanna have a good relationship with developers, and so you can get your asks delivered, and also you can have a good, healthy understanding from both sides on when you discuss security problems. Least privilege. I really like this tool, RepoKit, developed by Netflix. The reason I like this tool is because it takes away permissions over time. So you run it, and over time it keeps checking, does this developer need this permission? And it checks the logs, and if not, then it takes it away. Of course, the developers can regain those permissions, but you can achieve least privilege over time by default. These are some existing frameworks for or maturity models for not necessarily AppSec, but like very close to AppSec that you can check out. Now the question is like, what type of people you want to hire for AppSec? Of course, people who can write and read code. This is very important because those developers or those AppSec members, they're going to spend a lot of time with developers discussing security issues and discussing code problems. So you want to know, you want to hire people who actually can write and read code. And remember, hiring teams don't really scale. But as I said, automation and self-service does. So focus on those two key things. And of course, hire people who can embrace attackers' mindset because you want those people to be understanding how specific attacks happen, and so they can better understand how to develop more scanning or solutions for these problems. You want to train them, teach them how to be effectively writing reports on bugs and documentations. Otherwise, your findings will be hard to sell. So you want to teach them how to do that. Check out these trainings, very useful trainings, SANS, Offensive Security, and Black Hat. There is a workshop tomorrow, so make sure you attend that as well. And yeah, those are pretty good presentation trainings if you really want to send your AppSec team and get them to up-level their security knowledge. You can have them attend conferences, and I mean, the fact you're here, that's one conference, but also check out like those other conferences. A lot of these conferences are in US, but remember, like all these conferences these days are streamed live, or the records are actually on YouTube. So what structure works well for modern AppSec? I would say there is no one answer. I really like this structure because it sort of forms into three separate categories. You want to have the operational stuff, and that's maybe taken care of by on-call. And then you have the security partnership, and those are the people who are driving the holistic security improvements to drive down risk. And then you have the automation team or the AppSec engineering. And those are the people who are doing scanning and self-service and creating inventories and stuff like that. I really recommend you read Scanning AppSec and Netflix by Asta Singhal. It's pretty good blog post that talks in details about these things. I'm gonna go quickly into metrics because we only have 5 minutes left. Now you did all that stuff. Now you want to know how good are you doing in terms of metrics, right? So there are three primary metrics: technical, operational, and executive. Before we even understand like what metrics we are going to work with in our process, we need to understand what basic flow would be work with the metrics. So as you can see here, we must first understand that discover and define what our metrics will be, right? And then the second phase would be acquisition of data. A good metrics is really good as far as the quality of your data is concerned. And finally is the evaluation and understanding of the data. Some sort of like technical metrics you can look at is the number of vulns found over time, the severity, type of vulns you found, discovery methods, time to remediate. Again, this talk presentation will be shared with the group. So if you haven't caught any of these quickly, then just remember you're gonna get the copy of the slides. You're going to collect those metrics using tools and calling in APIs that will help you automate the collection of those metrics so you can put them all in one dashboard. The second one is the operational metrics. Those are basically helps the security orgs see patterns and weaknesses in the application security program. And it will also help you understand the risks and trends. Some sort of operational metrics you can collect: visibility, for example, how complete is your testing coverage? Risks, which system have the highest number of vulnerabilities? And remediation and improvements. Executive metrics, how's the application security program improved security, risk posture overall? Those will be actually important for your executive or leadership team because they really don't necessarily care about specific vulnerabilities and the details of your AppSec technical scanners. They just need to know those sort of metrics. And remember that you actually need to present problems and offer solutions. And problems without solutions are problems nobody wants to deal with. Can't end this talk without talking about open source, scaling AppSec and Netflix and TLDRSec. So try to open source things. If you work on open source stuff, it helps the community, helps you on your resume. Really check out this Scaling AppSec and Netflix by Asta. It's a pretty good blog post. And last but not least is the TLDRSec. It's a newsletter by Clint, my friend. Weekly talks about AppSec stuff. It's you can check out this URL and sign up. Key takeaways: take the journey as a marathon, not a sprint. Try to automate everything. Focus on security by design and killing bug classes. Self-service and champ programs help you scale tremendously. And yeah, I think we have 3 minutes for questions. I'm not sure if we have any questions in the chat.
Thank you so much, Ala, for the talk. It was really nice, actually. I can't see many questions in the chat, but I got one question, actually.
Yes, I have a question.
Go ahead. Okay, go ahead, Layla. I'll follow. Yeah.
I have a very important question. Since you work in Netflix, how does it really work? All the talk about shift left and the security stuff. Because when we attend all the sessions, Netflix and big firms in application production always mention Netflix and others as an example of how security is very, very, very well centered of everything in the organization and application development. From experience, do you think that all what has been mentioned actually works in real life, or it's only theoretical? What do you think about that? Because we always use this example, even us in Jordan, for example, we use Netflix as an example, but does it really work?
Yeah, that's a good question, Leila. So all the things I mentioned are actually not theoretical. They are actually 100% practical. And if you think at companies like big firms, not necessarily Netflix, but like really big tech companies, keeping up with the developers and the code and the infrastructure is a major challenge, right? And that's not a secret thing. It's a known thing. But everything I mentioned is really boils down to how much of that stuff is going to help you reduce the risk overall. And if you have a company that you want to implement security AppSec program, or even having just some security practitioners, those are the first steps for you to build a successful program. And are those the only things? Of course not. I mean, we at Netflix like do a lot of other things, right? This is just part of the infrastructure or part of the puzzle. But if you think about it from an overall perspective, your end goal is really to reduce the risk, and it varies from company to company. Those things might not work for regulated industry like banks, but it could work very well for startups maybe, or tech companies that really embrace the idea of having both security and developers partnering together to improve security overall. So I don't know if that answers your question.
Yes, it does. It happens, yeah, it works.
Yeah, absolutely, 100%.
Thank you, Layla. Ala, I have a question about penetration testing.
Yep.
Now, traditionally in traditional AppSec programs, penetration testing used to be a gate, essential step. before releasing the application to the next step, going live with the application. Now, how do you see penetration testing in modern AppSec environments? Do you think it's gonna still be a required step or a necessary step for testing, or it's gonna be
actually
taken out? I mean,
they say that traditional pen test will die in the future. It should not be there. What's your take on that?
Yeah, we heard this a lot actually from AppSec specialists.
Yeah, I think this is actually a great question. And if you think about like modern AppSec or modern infrastructures in general, there has been a lot of shift towards modern frameworks that have security by default, right? So a lot of companies, for example, use the Django, or they use Spring framework, right? And usually those frameworks come with a lot of security built in these frameworks that will unlikely that something could go wrong, right? So that's the first thing. So there has been a lot of shift towards those frameworks. The second thing is there is a lot of companies, there are a lot of companies are doing bug bounty today, right? So although this happens after the application gets out of gate or out of the door, you still have researchers finding those things in exchange for reward. And if you think about pen testing is not cheap, right? So if you have to do pen test for each individual app, it's probably going to cost you a lot of money versus having a bug bounty program where you probably end up paying way less amount of money over time, and they actually provide you with good quality reports. So the way I think about it is, if you really actually doing shift left and using modern frameworks, I would say pen test can come only for really very high risky assets. For the assets that you can't just jeopardize security for those assets, because if it happens, the impact for the risk is very high. So that, I think, again, like there's no right or wrong answer, but I think from my perspective, pen test is still a requirement, but it all depends on your organization. If you're just doing agile development with no frameworks in mind, you're doing everything internally, and you don't have any sort of shift left approaches, you don't have like maybe security team, yeah, I would say probably pen test is a requirement for you. But if you have a good security team and you're shifting left, and you have a lot of scanners that detects low-hanging fruits, and you have a good bug bounty program, you just need pen test for the high risky assets.
Thank you, Ala. Ala, I have a question from Riyadh. Hi, Riyadh. What are the most recommended frameworks and standards to secure APIs?
For securing APIs?
Yes.
So there is
most recommended frameworks and standards.
Yeah. So there is a lot of references on OWASP for securing APIs. So you can check out the OWASP API security recommendations. It all depends on how you're going to structure the API, if it's REST API, gRPC, or something else. But typically, the things that really important for any API is make sure that it's using TLS, HTTPS, and make sure that it has some sort of authentication and also authorization. And if this APIs requires that another service has to talk to this service, then make sure that you're creating some sort of mutual TLS connection. Of course, there's a bunch of other things you can do, like OWASP top 10, to make sure that there's no XSS, there's no CSRF issues, there's no SSRF issues. So there's a lot of things that can be done on the API side, but those are most of the common ones that we implement.
Yeah, may I add on that, maybe API management tools also, platforms, can also help you to manage all the APIs in one platform and do some level of security there, so everything is managed.
Yeah, fast API is a good
API management tool.
Mm-hmm.
I have last question, Ala. I noticed there is a gap between developers and security engineers. So usually security engineers don't know development, and developers don't know security. So this actually creates lots of problem in securing your application, making sure that I don't know, in shifting left, this is crucial actually. So how can we, like, maybe cultural issues sometimes in the organization, to like, you don't want to get, it's not your business to get into my code, it's not your security is my business. I don't know, it's complicated.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree with you actually. I think this is a very important thing to highlight, is when I mentioned about the shift left approach, and you want to train your developers, right? You don't want them to be security experts, but you want to train them enough that they understand security. But all that stuff cannot be encompassed without having a partnership approach. The partnership approach is the key, right? Because as you said, right, there is a disconnect between developers and the security engineers, because they don't necessarily have this partnership approach, right? If you have a partnership approach, you build good relationship with your developers, then it comes naturally that your developer will listen to you, and they will actually try to not just listen to you, but help you improve security. They might have other ideas, right, that will improve overall security for the company. So it's very important that both should work together. They should talk more, and they both should understand, like developers should understand security, but you don't want them to be security experts. And of course, giving them the right tooling and enable them to have the right tooling to build security.
Yeah, perfect. Yes.
Ala, we are wrapping up, but we have two questions. The first one from Nadeem. How would one go about remediating an incomplete asset inventory and keeping gaps to a minimum that in that regard? And the second question, do we need to have output encoding when using APIs to prevent from cross-site scripting, noting that APIs are used in web, mobile, and TV apps?
Yes. So the first question is about the assets. This is a major challenge, and I think I briefly mentioned the slides that you want to prioritize your things that you want to fix, right? You have in asset inventory a bunch of bugs, right, or a bunch of security issues. How would you go about that? So I actually shared a lot of details in my Black Hat talk, but if you want just the TLDR, try to create some sort of triaging mechanism. This triaging mechanism takes into consideration things like what is the riskiest assets, what are the riskiest issues affecting my app, meaning like what is the CVS score for those things, and is the application that is being impacted actually, is the security issue actually can be compromised from outside, or can be affected by like actual attackers from outside. So you have to kind of create some sort of prioritization strategy that will help you remediate those. Again, you'll never be able to remediate everything. You just need to prioritize. So that's the first question. The second question is the output encoding. Yes, you need to do that, because actually in web views in iOS and Android, you can still have XSS issues. I gave a presentation back in 2011 about having an XSS in Android and iOS using web views. So yes, you still need to do output encoding, and appropriately also doing sanitization on the input, so you don't have to worry about this. But yes, output encoding is important for TV UI and the mobile web view stuff.
Okay, great. I think that's it. Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Ala. This was really very insightful talk from you, and really well coherent about app security, and we had really a very interesting audience with us. We had pleasure having you with us. Hope you will see you in Amman soon.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes, we're so happy. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. So guys, the next session with Mazin will start in 5 minutes. Let's just have a small break, and we will remain online if you want to stay. We are still here, and Mazin will join us. In a bit, we'll talk about Terraforms. Hi, Mazin.
Hi, Mazin.
Okay. And then, yes. So let's just give everyone their break, 5 minutes break. Yes. Few minutes and we'll start. Yes. Less than 5 minutes. Yes. 4.
Yeah.
Yes, we'll set ourselves up. Okay. Okay, so we're back. We'll post on everywhere also for everyone else to join. Mazin, we'll make you as presenter now.
Right.
Mazin, we are very glad that you are with us today in this talk. You can start first, as if you like, by introducing yourself, and also speaking in English and in Arabic as you like. But we have English speakers, English only speakers in the audience. I can see on the attendee list.
Oh,
so
wow.
Please, you can start. We are really happy to have you with us, and I'm sure you will cover a very interesting topic, a very hot topic about the terraforms, and not only terraforms, attacking them. So it will be really interesting, and it's also emerging in Jordan. So it will be very fruitful and thoughtful for me to add to talk to us about it. Thank you so much, and please feel free to start.
Thank you very much. I'm really glad to be here. By the way, Leila, do you think we should have the session in English instead of Arabic? I thought to have it in Arabic for since
As
it's
you like, yani, as you like. I'm looking at the attendees list. يعني mostly
maybe it's more than 50%
we have
Arabic.
English. Yes. No, we have English speakers. There are many, so only.
Okay, it's fine. Like I think we can have it in English then.
Yes. If for the all attendees, if anything is not clear, please let us know, and you can ask questions through the questions tab or the chat. We will see it and we'll be following on it.
Yep, for sure. Just 1 second. So yeah, attacking Terraform environments. Thank you everyone for tuning in today to today's talk. Today I have a really interesting topic to talk about. It's about attacking Terraform, how we can approach a company that is using Terraform, and how we can exploit Terraform instances in our favor. It will be a technical topic. I will going to cover everything related to Terraform and how we can exploit it and how we can use it in compromising the infrastructure of a company with real-world examples and scenarios. I'm excited, so let's start. Before we start, a bit about me. I'm Mazin Ahmed. I'm an application security and offensive security engineer. I also founded Full100.io, the next generation continuous security platform for asset discovery and the attack surface. And also, I am a conditional bug bounty hunter. I was acknowledged before by Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Zoom, and many more. And I'm in love with cloud security, so security automation, DevSecOps, but anything that is related to cloud is what I am really passionate about. So the agenda of today, first we start with the background of what's Terraform, how it works, just to get things starting, and then why do we care about learning how to attack Terraform? And then the attack vectors and scenarios that we're going to have today, and then the recommendations at the end of the talk. And then we wrap up with questions. So what's infrastructure as a code? Let's go back in the old days where the cloud were relatively a new thing. People would be just, let's take AWS as, I would take, and over this talk, I would be talking about AWS as the main cloud provider, but this applies to every cloud provider. So back in the day, people would be going to AWS and then they would be deploying in, I don't know, a database instance or an EC2 instance or a S3 bucket or anything like that. They would be doing this through the console or like they would go and log in and then they would just follow the amazing dashboard that AWS have, and then that they would have their instance up and running. While it's good, the problem is as the company scale, this becomes tedious to manage, to secure, to review from different perspectives. So one is if you have like 2 or 3 assets or 5 or 20, that wouldn't be a problem. But if you have 100 or 1,000 assets and you would like to review all of their configuration, review all of their policies, continuously check them, and whenever something is new being deployed, you definitely don't want to have this being done in a manual check while you are signing off paperwork, for example, like in the really old days where people were doing this. You would like to have it in a more modernized way. So how this is being done today is using infrastructure as a code. Let's say we're going to take the same exact scenario of deploying to AWS, and me, Mazin, I would like to deploy an EC2 instance. I would be writing a Terraform code or an IAC code that would say, hey, I would like to deploy this EC2 instance with this configuration, with this network security group, or all of the things that I have. And then it would be passing through review from people who are responsible for that, the infrastructure team, the security team, etc. And then it would get a peer review that after that would be able to merge it. Being able to write this in code gives you so much of features. In the beginning, it's definitely hard to do, like to establish, and the beginning of the program, let's say for modernizing your cloud program. But as you go along with this becomes really beneficial, because when you are writing your infrastructure resources as code, you can have this code being archived and documented using something like Git, for example. And then when you deploy it or when you push it as into GitHub, for example, and then you have it in a PR, and then you have people you can invite to listen for the thoughts and comments and typical code review, then you would be able to get much more feedback and, of course, better security, better infrastructure configuration. And not only that, if you can have it just within the same Git workflow, then you would be able to implement CI so that it can do different security checks, different configuration checks before even having someone actually reviewing it. So CI is amazing, and having this with infrastructure as code is also amazing. So there is no real reason that I can say do not go with infrastructure as code. It's really cool. You should be doing this because of so many features that would bring. Of course, this is not a marketing talk. I'm not going to talk about Terraform or and how cool it will make your infrastructure is. I'm just saying that infrastructure as code is really important today. So what's Terraform? Terraform is an open source infrastructure as code software tool that was developed by HashiCorp, and it uses this language called HCL for writing configuration code. And then the deployment happens through Terraform, where you would be writing the entire configuration, and then you would push it to Terraform, and Terraform would be analyzing the code and then execute it and apply it for you. And why am I talking about Terraform instead of all of the other IAC providers or orchestrators? Because Terraform today is the most popular one on this planet. There is AWS CloudFormation, there is I think Pulumi and many other, I think, but Terraform is in the top of this list. And recently they have reached 100 million downloads. So you can imagine how big Terraform is in the cloud market today. The cool thing about Terraform and the idea of using Terraform is it's cloud agnostic. It's not like AWS CloudFormation, where you are writing configurations specifically made for AWS. You can write the same Terraform code to deploy for different resources in AWS, and the same code can deploy to Azure or GCP or any provider that you have in mind. While this sounds amazing enough, imagine that if Terraform is supporting more than 1,000 providers. So you can write Terraform code or IAC code to manage your entire infrastructure for almost every single provider that you would be using. I have seen instances where people are writing Terraform code to manage their GitHub repositories. It's going crazy. So how does this one work? You have the practitioner or the user deploying into would like to deploy something, and then they would be writing the code, and then this code will be pushed to something called like to a service in Terraform called Terraform Plan, and Terraform Plan would be analyzing the code and tell you, hey, you have these changes that are happening, these things are being added, and these things are being destroyed. FYI, would you like to continue? If you'd like to continue, you say Terraform apply, and then you can have the same thing running again with an actual action of deploying the resources. And boom, you have your resource up and running. And while this sounds good, if you're trying to threat model this from a security perspective, you would see that the cool thing here, or the thing that you would need to focus on, is what is being on this red circle here. The code that you would write, and you would be pushed to an instance of Terraform that is responsible for planning and applying the change. And this change, if let's say Terraform would like to deploy something in AWS, this means that this instance have access to administrator access to this account or this provider. This means that this server, if it has been compromised or something bad happens to it, then you would be able to compromise the other account through this instance. So if this is controlling GCP, Azure, I don't know, Cloudflare for DNS or whatever resource or like a provider that you're using with, then probably if you compromise this, you would be able to access the remaining. Amazing. So yeah, with great power comes great responsibility. This is the exact part that you can say with Terraform. Terraform controller has access to everything. How it works? When you're deploying things in Terraform, documents every single thing that you are deploying and within your resources, and then it stores them into something called the state file. And this state file would have configuration notes about everything, and then when you are deploying again, it will check the state file to see the delta and see what's being changed. If something is being changing here, then it will tell you about it, and then it will be added to the state file. Also, it stores the outputs for different things from the API calls. So you would find stuff here if you get the chance to access it, like the state file. What I'm saying is, if you have get object, like IAM policy rule, IAM access here for the S3 bucket that is used for storing the Terraform state files, this would maybe grant you access to access keys, database, passwords, everything that could be interesting could be found there. So yeah, after even getting this, this IAM user would that you would probably get would have administrator access policy, because Terraform would ideally want this to deploy things to AWS. So if you get the key that is being used by Terraform, boom, you're in as an admin. Let me get some water here. Yep. So this is the first thing that to think about when you're attacking a company that has Terraform for their infrastructure as code. Look for this S3 bucket that would have state files that are being used within Terraform. When you find this, you have access to that. This is game over. But state files are not only there. Let's talk about states on the Terraform enterprise. So we have the typical environment where people are using the Terraform binary to do deployments. And still, like, you have the other way of using Terraform Enterprise, where you have an enterprisey level of doing these deployments, and it's similar to Terraform Cloud if anyone used it, but this one would allow you to host the entire thing within your infrastructure. You would deploy an instance. You would specify how you'd like to store your state files. And then you would grant it different accesses that it would need to do the changes, and then boom. Okay. So here we talked about having it on S3, but within Terraform Enterprise, you have other options. You can store it in a PostgreSQL, you can in RDS, in Mountain Disk, or you can even have it in the same instance and different ways. So if you get access to anything that is hosting these state files, this is totally good for you. You reach a great level. You probably are capable of compromising the entire infrastructure now. But if you did not really reach that one like by its own, and you were able to compromise the Terraform instance, then you compromise the infrastructure because it has access to everything that is needed. Another thing that I have is a red team tip. If you ever seen if you ever compromise a TFE instance, this is the best place for attack persistence. The reason is no one really ever touches this after a successful deployment. Breaks rarely happens because this is a production and sensitive environment, and people would really want it to be up and running the entire time. Most of the updates are not as critical as they would take someone to go and to update it, so people typically ignore it. If you compromise a Terraform Enterprise instance, it would be a great place to store your attack persistence. Oh, by the way, it comes pre-installed with almost every single tool that you would need by default. And yep, and yeah, of course, definitely, it has the latest database credentials, because if someone is deploying something or changing something or rotating a key, the key would still be stored in the state file. So if someone really felt that something is bad happening, they can go up to to Terraform and deploy and rotate the key, and then when they rotate the key, probably it would be stored in Terraform again. So yeah, that would be cool if you do this, and just send me a tweet about this, or in a red team engagement, I mean, of course. And by the way, Terraform Enterprise, it's quite popular on the internet. There are companies have Terraform Enterprise exposed to the internet. This is a bad practice. You should never expose this instance to the internet. You should have it on an isolated VPC where only authorized IPs or authorized parties can access to it. These are some filters that you can use to find ones. Hopefully your company is not there within this list. Another thing, if you, let's say the first two or first tricks did not really work with you, you can think about abusing Terraform APIs. And how this one works is Terraform API, Terraform Enterprise and Terraform Cloud gives you a full API that could allow you to do all of the things that you would be doing while using Terraform Cloud or Enterprise. And this API could be used into retrieving the state file that is already, as discussed. It's really important to have it saved in a sensitive or mark it as a sensitive thing. So if it wasn't possible for you to compromise the database responsible for storing the state files, it's possible to ask Terraform Cloud or Terraform Enterprise to print it in plain text nicely. And it works. It's really fun. This would mostly contain sensitive data, as we talked earlier. All right. And now let's jump into another fun vector that I have. This was initially documented by Alex K. He's a security researcher that wrote about it on their blog about Terraform Plan RCE. And this seems to be some sort of a by design issue with Terraform, but people weren't really talking about it. How it works is, like, if you use this attack in a real world scenario and you have access to push code into a Git repository, and then this Git repository would be running CI on GitHub or on a different, or in the code in general that you have that are being planned, then it's most likely that you would be able to get remote code execution within the Terraform instance that is running the CI. Because how it works is you can write a provider that would be able to execute code. By default, Terraform providers are like, you can easily go and create a provider and then push it to Terraform providers registry, and from there you would be able to import it from externally. And then when you import this one and you install it and download it and install it, and then you use it in a code or you call it, then it will be invoked. When this happens, you get an instant code execution. I don't know how Terraform is not really fixing this. I haven't really seen a way to fix it, but this is an actual thing, and it's really bad. So how it works is a person that submits a PR can execute a payload and compromise the Terraform instance. And just to add this, since anyone is able to push code into the Terraform providers registry, maybe it, in the off chances that someone is looking for that and it will get detected, someone figure out that there is an API that is also provided by Terraform to execute external programs as Terraform code, and then takes the input of that, the output of that code and that command into Terraform. Sounds like a very useful feature, but man, this is bad. Why? Because someone can submit a PR with a file called prune.tf with this code, and guess what? This command will be executed on the Terraform Enterprise instance, and it will not generate any errors because it's throwing or outputting a valid JSON. I personally tried it in different experiments, and it was functioning in different places. It works on the CLI, it works on Enterprise, Terraform Enterprise level, and there is no way to fix it. Okay, now we're reaching the end of the talk, and what should we do here? First, be careful. It's really difficult to maintain a secure Terraform environment. Like, Terraform has done amazing work on the growth and the developer toolkit that can be used for automating the deployments and managing your infrastructure. There are many things to do when it comes to the security. Oh, Wow, this is not really nice thing to have on a live talk. I think I will mute myself. Also long, but yeah. As I was saying, be careful. It's really hard to do that to maintain a secure Terraform environment. Being careful is my main recommendation here. Also, if you are storing your state files in S3, you can implement a bucket access policy that prevents other users from accessing any resource within this bucket, other than this particular Terraform user that is managing the state file. This would be really useful. So someone would be able to list out the bucket, but then when they go and they will try to retrieve this object, they would get a 403 or something, and you are safe for this phase. And maybe if you have login enabled, maybe you would get an alert that someone is trying to fetch this resource, and you can do actions upon that. Maybe you're already compromised and someone is trying to pivot into your network to get better access. Just throwing ideas that could be useful here. Also, continuously update and review your TFE instance. It can be easily forgetting in the noise. No one is really going and logging in and checking how is it working unless it's down or something bad happens. In the typical cases, nothing bad happens. No one logs in, and of course this is bad. You should continuously review it. And be careful in permitting people to have write access on any branch on the Terraform repository. It can lead to a direct code execution, and there is no way to patch it. And the problem here is, since there is no way to patch it, and at the same time, companies typically give write access to everyone to write to non-protected branches, then what happens here is anyone within the company on a typical setup would be able to push code to Terraform, to the TFE server, and then they would get access to that server because of this vulnerability. How to fix it? This is something that is still not known how to do that. Everyone in the cloud security community is trying to brainstorm ideas, experiment different ways until an official patch comes from Terraform. But in the meanwhile, yeah, hopefully all stays the same and secure. Anyway, also maintain the Terraform Enterprise instance in an isolated VPC. You don't want to have it being public in the internet. There's the chance that there is a 0-day that people are exploiting. You don't want people to mass scan the internet and look up for Terraform Enterprise instances, and then they would go and exploit yours. And yeah, would be a direct data breach. Another thing is state files are sensitive. They contain data that ranges from database passwords to certificates and access keys. So treat them as sensitive data. And to add at the end, final thoughts. Terraform is amazing. It brings several security features and when implementing ISE within Terraform, but still with great power comes great responsibility. Protect your Terraform environment because things can go bad easily. And of course, stay safe. Set up persistent monitor like Full Hunt to discover shadow IT, misconfigurations, and mistakenly exposed services like the Terraform instance that we talked about. And with that being said, thank you very much. Let's start with the questions.
Thank you, Mazin. I have many questions to ask about the topic. Starting from the recommendations. So do you think it's too early for big organizations or financial institutes to start using Terraforms, considering the attack surface and such a risky setup? Is it too early for us, for example, to use it, or no, we can maintain a balance?
No, it's not. I don't think that it's too early for organizations, even if it's a sensitive organization like financial organizations, to use Terraform or infrastructure as code in general. The problem comes when the security team would not really putting a lot of focus on the infrastructure and as code security here. Then these where the problems would come up. But in general, using Terraform is really helpful. Because let's say that the other choices that you would have is to deploy things using the console or using the API. But how would you really manage this within a company that has that deploys, let's say, 100 assets every month? You simply can't. So with Terraform, at least you would be able to run pre-checks using on the CI before even the security team comes up and review it. You would be able to have different compliance and configuration checks done. There are tools that are readily available there, like I don't know, TFSec, Checkoff, and Central Policy for sure, a tool by HashiCorp. And if you implement this and implement a proper CI, then if the build is succeeding, then you would be able to go and have a layer 2 evaluation of the infrastructure change to see if there's anything bad. But it like the amount of things that are helpful that it brings is much more than the cons.
Okay, clear. Another question about the tools supportability for Terraform and the clouds, yani both ways. Terraform on GCP, is it different than Terraform on AWS? Is it different for F5 than Palo Alto or Cisco or any other? There are so many factors when it comes to using an infrastructure as a code tool.
Yep, you're right. So
what is the differences, or you're only focusing on AWS about the topic, or it's general?
So the cool thing about Terraform that it would support around more than 1,000 providers. So, but the problem is, just because it supports it doesn't mean that the tools would support that. And exactly the same point that you said. So what you can do here is you would go and check. For example, let's take an example like TFSec, a tool that I personally use, have great support for AWS, for Azure, for GCP, I think Alibaba Cloud, and I don't know, Oracle Cloud. But and I don't think that it supports other cloud providers. So if you have a cloud provider that you are using and you would like to implement compliance checks, you are better using Sentinel policies. This product would allow you to write custom tools, custom checks, and then you can use something like SimGrip to do the same thing, an open source alternative. And when you do this, you'd be able to review the code and for custom checks. Of course, this would require like manual work.
Yeah, I got many questions, Mazin, regarding the root cause, the main root cause of those remote code execution issues that you highlighted in your talk. Do you think that improper access management is the real pain or the main pain in environment like Terraform? Or what do you think if you want to analyze the root causes of such remote code execution vulnerabilities with this impact?
This particular remote code execution vulnerability, to be honest, I think this is the fault of Terraform. They should have support to have whitelisted providers to be whitelisted or being declared before execution. so that a person would say, hey, I would like to have a security check to check for these particular providers, I don't know, AWS, Azure, GCP. And then if someone is calling something different, do not execute it, do not install it. But here, Terraform is willingly going and download and install and plan any code that is going to be provided to it. Imagine it as an interpreter, like I don't know, Python interpreter or something like that. Whatever code that you are importing, it will execute, but Terraform should have an option to whitelist providers, and this is not there yet. And you cannot really patch it or prevent it in Terraform Enterprise. Like with the CI implementation, you have to, like a temporary way is to parse the code first and then implement like a separate CI that would only execute if the code does not have providers that are not there. But then you will not benefit from all of the enterprise features that you would get with Terraform Enterprise.
Are you aware of any security like standard or hardening guides for Terraform environment or best practices that you can refer?
Most of them are within the tools that are being used, like TFSec and Chekhov. They already have pre-built security checks for Terraform, and these are focusing on general things and also focused on provider level things, mainly on the 3 top providers. If you start with these ones and you are doing well, probably you would be able to run the program in a better way. But this could be a good start.
Okay. Great. Any questions? Yeah, are there any questions from the audience?
No, I can't see any.
Still a new topic in Jordan. People are still hesitant to participate. It's a new topic.
Yeah. The cool thing is to try to bring it to the MENA region. Like Terraform is used in the MENA region, but it's not as used as in the US. So it's cool to have it discussed.
So do you think it's it's on the rise, or it will not be implemented? It will not die, because we can feel that there is a lot of resistance in our countries, Arab countries.
I think every new technology would have this, this type of persistence, because humans do not really like the change. And Terraform is here and is going to stay for the long run. They, like, with the amount of growth that that happened in the past 2 years, there is no any indicator that it will go away. The same thing goes for cloud. If you would like to use cloud, you have to put security, and if you would like to implement security, you have to start with the basics. Infrastructure as a code would be one of the basics things to start with. So yeah, it's going to start to stay. Just people will try to adapt to it.
Yes, I think also there are a lot of hybrid cloud setups, or hybrid and on-prem. And this is also one of the challenging points of having, for example, the cloud setup on Terraform, and then go back to manual processes and console activities through console by infrastructure admins. So they would prefer to do it all the same way. I think this is also one of the points. We're not only native cloud applications or setups. We have a lot of hybrid. We're still in the transition phase.
This one, I'm not really sure. I haven't really implemented the on-prem infrastructure using Terraform before, so I'm not really sure about it. But if you would like to go with cloud, I think this is the best way with Terraform. But for on-prem, I haven't really even heard feedback before from my colleagues about success cases with on-prem with Terraform.
Yes, on-prem people go more with Ansible, with Ansible.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, I think that's it for us.
Thank you, everyone. And hopefully this one will be recorded, and I will try to post it on my
Sure,
Twitter account.
Sure. Thank you, Mazin. Yeah, after the event, we will share each session on our YouTube channel. Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mazin.
Yeah, we'll take now a break. Yeah, yes.
Yeah,
5
we'll take
minutes?
a break, and yeah, we're coming back on 8:15.
No, at 8. We can come back at 8. It's
Yeah,
fine.
at 8 with Mohammad Shami regarding the last session. راح تكون في العربي طبعا السيشن mainly. محمد شامر هيعطينا فكرة يعني how to build secure home lab environment, H tools, what is his ideas في هذا الموضوع. فيا 5 minutes. Yeah.
I think we can start now. Yeah, Rami, Mohammad, you're with us. خلينا نعمل محمد presenting.
مرحبا.
مرحبا محمد، كيفك؟ شو الأخبار؟ كيف حالك؟
We can't hear you. مش سامع.
أنا آسف كنت ميوتد.
هلا شامي، كيف حالك؟
يعطيكم ألف عافية.
احنا سعداء تكون معنا السنة الثانية. حكينا هلا عن very important topic صراحة. أنا بشوف يعني any serious يعني security engineer لازم يكون عنده some kind of يعني لاب داخلي في المنزل، يعني to do testing, to do experimenting things, learning things, or على cloud. يعني it will be beneficial يعني for any engineer في الفيلد.
هلا لازم يكون في عندك environment تعمل عليها testing. ليش؟ معظم الناس بتشوف السيستمز من جهة واحدة، يا إما كناحية system administration، يا إما كناحية development، يا إما كناحية security. المفروض الواحد يطلع على السيستمز من كل الجهات. اللي بيشتغل security أو متخصص بالsecurity لازم يكون يعرف شوية development وشوية system administration. بنفس الوقت السيستم ادمنستريتور لازم يكون يعرف شويه ديفلوبمنت وشويه سكيورتي، والديفلوبر يكون بيعرف بالفيلدز الثانيه برضه. هذا الحكي زي ما بيحكوا احنا، او عشان تكون سائق سباق محترف مش ضروري تكون تعرف ميكانيك، بس لازم يكون عندك شيء بسموه ميكانيكال سيمباثي، انه يكون عندك فكره على الاقل كيف الشغلات الثانيه بتشتغل، مشان لما بتعمل ديزاين او تعمل اي امبلمنتيشن تكون شايف كل الجهات، او على الاقل يكون عندك ولو فكره عن كل الجهات مشان تعمل احسن سوليوشن بيناسب الشيء اللي انت بتحاول تعمله.
صحيح. يعني انا بشوف يعني كانجينير يعني بفيدك سواء كنت في الديفلوبمنت او كنت في الاي تي انفراستراكشر ادمنستريشن او كسكيورتي، انك تكون ملم باكثر من دومين. يعني بتكون مور ماتشورد انجينير، يعني ما يكون مثلا سيستم ادمن he never done a script، يعني بيكون مشكله. او security engineer never done automated scanning or automated for his internal يعني testing or protecting things. فابسولوتلي يعني it will help. طيب هلا ان شاء الله راح ناخذ تفاصيل اكثر، يعني كيف نبني المختبر المنزلي، خلينا نحكي، لانه هاي المحاضره في العربي. يا اعطيك هلا يعني المايك، تفضل.
بس محمد احنا معنا سبيكرز سوري اتنديز نون عربي سبيكرز، يعني اذا
هلا انا بتحبوا اكمل بالانجليزي بكمل بالانجليزي، ما في مشكله.
يعني كم واحد بالانجليزي؟
لازم نحسب الكل.
بس لسبب ما الشاشه عندي عم بتبدل. ثواني بالله. تمام. هيك كل الامور تمام؟ الكل شايف الشاشه عندي؟
100%.
يس تمام.
بتحبوا اكمل انجليزي ولا عربي؟
انا بفضل عربي لانه التوبيك يعني بهم اكثر، يعني معظم يعني فريش او مش يعني معظم الانجينيرز معنا حاليا عرب، ف ويعني شفت مور ريليفنت ممكن تدخل مصطلحات انجليزي يعني في الفري اللي بريحك.
تمام. هلا مصطلحات الانجليزي اكيد راح تفوت لانه بالاخر كل الشغل بالانجليزي، بس الموضوع راح يطرح بالعربي عشان المجموعه اللي موجوده.
لانه كمان يعني بنفس التوبيك في كثير توكس بالانجلش، فانا حابب يكون بهذا التوك سبيسيفيكلي توكس يعني شيء بالعربي
بالضبط، لانه احنا واحده من الشغلات اللي عم نحاول نعملها انه نثري المحتوى العربي.
بالضبط. تفضل.
تمام. يعطيكم العافيه جميعا. اسمي محمد الشامي، بشتغل في سلطه تسجيل الانترنت الرقميه. هاي منظمة أنشئت بأواخر الثمانينات، وكانت أول مسؤولياتها تسجيل نطاقات .ca. طبعا من وقتها لهلا تفرعوا، صار عندهم أكثر من منتج. واحدة من الشغلات اللي عم نشتغل عليها اللي هي DNS based security. أنا حاليا بهداك التيم، واليوم راح أحكي لكم عن كيف بدنا نبني reasonably secure home lab. يعني ما راح نروح على التوتال سيكيورتي الفاينانشال انستتيوشنز والبنوك بتحتاجها، بس على الأقل إنه نتعلم ونحمي حالنا. في البداية بدي أحكي لكم عن حالي. أنا سيستم أدمنستريتور من 17 سنة. بلشت في باتلكو الأردن بال 2005، ومن هذيك الأيام لهلأ بشتغل يونكس بيست اوبريتنج سيستمز. اشتغلت بفترة سويفت، بس هلأ عم بشتغل ديف اوبس سبيشالست بسيرة. تكنولوجي انثوزياست من ال 86، من يوم ما انحط بايدي اول كمبيوتر صخر بهذيك الايام، ومن يومها ادمنت كل شيء تكنولوجي. بحب الاوبن سورس، بشتغل لينكس من ال 2003 وبشتغل BSD من ال 2007. بيرفورمانس فريك، كثير بحب البرفورمانس. اوبتمايزيشن للداتابيسز والPHP ستاك والويب سيرفيسز والكاشنج والكي فاليو ستورز اللي بدكم اياه. برضه متزوج وعندي ولدين، عبد الله عمره 6 سنين ولين عمرها 2 سنين. عن ايش بدنا نحكي اليوم؟ ليش بدنا نعمل هوم لاب؟ نعمل الهوم لاب على الكلاود ولا في البيت عندنا؟ الهوم لاب هذا رح يكون مكلف ولا لا؟ بعض الريكومنديشنز اللي بدنا نحكي فيها بالهاردوير والسوفت وير. اكسترا لاير اوف سكيورتي بدنا نضيفه اللي هو DNS based security. بعدين راح احكي عن النتورك توبولوجي بالهوم لاب تبعي، اعطيكم مثال انه كيف ممكن الهوم لاب يكون. واذا ضل معنا وقت راح افرجيكم ديمو صغير عن كيف نبني هوم لاب سريع بلاينود باستخدام تيرافورم، اللي هو كان زميلي مازن عم بحكي عنه قبل شوي. اول شيء رح تسالوني اياه، ليش بدنا نبني هوم لاب؟ الهوم لاب وظيفته الرئيسيه انه نتعلم. اذا بنطلع هنا على هذا الكوت من تشارلز كاترينج. تشارلز كاترينج كان الهيد اوف ريسيرش بجنرال موتورز من 1920 لل 1947. Knowing is not understanding. There is a great difference between knowing and understanding. You can know a lot about something and not really understand it. ممكن احنا نقعد نقرأ بتوبيك ايام وشهور وسنين، بس اذا فعليا احنا ما استعملناه وما جربناه بايدنا فاحنا فعليا ما بنفهم عنه شيء. يعني ممكن انا اقرأ عن تيرافورم، خلينا نحكي اقعد بالشهور اقرأ عنه، بس واحد يسلمني implementation لتيرافورم ما اعرف اعمل شيء. طب انا شو استفدت من هذا الحكي؟ لا، انا لازم ابني هوم لاب. بما انه انا بشتغل بالاوبريشنز مينلي، بستفيد من هذا الحكي. يعني مثلا في مره كنا بدنا نعمل انستليشن لكاستمر ب3 سيرفرز بروكسموكس. لما عملنا الهاردوير كوت اجانا ب $52,000. طب احنا لحديت هذيك اللحظه ما كنا بانيين بروكسموكس كلاستر. طب انا شخصيا مش مستعد اني اخذ الريسك واحكي للكاستمر انه خلينا نشتري لك هاردوير ب $52,000 وانا مش مجرب بايدي انه اعمل هذا الكلاستر. ماشي، في دوكيومنتيشن بيحكي انه هذا الكلاستر بنعمل، بس انا مش مستعد اخذ الريسك بدون ما امسك السيرفرات بروكسموكس بايدي واعمل عليها الكلاسترنج والفيل اوفر وكل الحكي هذا. في براين كانتريل، واحد من اللي كانوا يشتغلوا بسان مايكرو سيستمز وبعدين انتقل على الإيلوموس بروجكت وكان بفترة ماسك النود بروجكت، بيحكي إذا أنت ما جربت تكنولوجي ببرودكشن أنت ما جربت التكنولوجي هاي. فالهوم لاب يعني على الأقل بيعطيك إحساس بالبرودكشن، وعلى الأقل بيكون عندك فكرة كيف لما بتستعمل التكنولوجي هاي بريل برودكشن سيناريو كيف بيكون الوضع. طيب هلا بدنا نحكي احنا بدنا نعمل الهوم لاب هذا اون بريم عندنا في البيت ولا بالكلاود؟ هلا الفكره من الهوم لاب انه يكون انت عندك الفول كنترول على الانفراستراكشر تبعتك. بمعنى انه انا بدي اعمل 20 سيرفر سواء كانوا physical servers أو virtual machines، وأمسك هدول السيرفرز وأعمل فيهم operation معينة أو كلاستر معين، سواء web application، سواء API، سواء caching cluster، اللي بدك إياه. بس الفكرة إنه أنا أكون هذا الفول انستليشن أنا عندي access عليه. فإحنا ممكن نحطه هذا في البيت وممكن نحطه في الكلاود. طيب شو الفائدة إنه نحطه في الكلاود مقارنة مع البيت؟ في كتير ناس الإنترنت عندها سيئة، يعني مثلا بعيد عني نص ساعة بالسيارة، الأكثر سرعة ممكن ياخذوها 5 ميجا بتس بالثانية. طب 5 ميجا بتس هي دوب تعمل إشي. فإذا الواحد بده يشغل هوم لاب عنده بالبيت، يا إما إنه راح يستنى كتير، يا إما إنه راح يخرب على الناس التانيين اللي عنده بالبيت اللي بده يعمل أي إشي، وخصوصا إنه إحنا هلأ معظم الشغل عندنا صار ريموتلي. فالأحسن إنه بهي الحالة إنه يروح كلاود، لأنه الكلاود ماشي SSH كونكشن أو HTTP كونكشن صغير، بشبك فيه أنا على اللاب تبعي اللي موجود في لاينود، موجود في AWS، موجود في ديجيتال أوشن، ما عندي مشكلة. حتى لو أنا كان عندي very limited connection، يا 5 ميجا بتس DSL يا إما عندي 4G، بكفيني إني أعمل الادمنستريشن وإنه أشتغل كل الشغل من الكلاود. بس رح تسألوني ليش الهوم لاب؟ ليش أعمل كل شيء؟ ليش ما أعمل كل شيء على VM؟ الهايبرفايزرز هلا يعني كثير سهلت علينا شغلات. أنا بتذكر لما بلشت أشتغل لينكس بال 2003 ما كان في عندنا هايبرفايزرز، وما كانش عندي غير هالجهاز الواحد، كنت منزل عليه ويندوز وجنتو لينكس. ولما بدي اشوف شغله بجنتو، لانه ما كانش في عندي انترنت على جنتو بهذيك اللحظه، اضطر اعمل ريستارت، افوت على ويندوز، افوت على الانترنت، اقرا الشغله اللي بدي اياها، وبعد ما اخلص ارد اعمل ريستارت وافوت على جنتو. وبهي الطريقه تعلمنا. طبعا هذا الحكي كثير ضيع وقت. الهايبرفايزرز على الاقل انت الماشين تبعتك سواء كانت ويندوز او كانت ماك او كانت لينكس تشتغل وكل امورك تمام، وبتخلص كل شغلك بالهايبرفايزر. الهايبرفايزرز في منها اللي ببلاش مثل KVM ومثل فيرتشوال بوكس، وفي منها اللي كتير مكلف مثل الفي ام وير. وفعليا الهايبرفايزرز عملت لنا انفايرمنت كتير حلوه للشغل. يعني مثلا انا بامكاني اني اعمل 15 فيرتشوال ماشين على جهازي اذا كان جهازي قوي كفايه، واعمل كل التستنج عليه. بس في عندنا مشكلتين في الهايبرفايزرز، وخصوصي في جهه السكيورتي. الهايبرفايزر ما بيعطيني توتال ايسوليشن. اذا بنطلع على السي في ايز بخلال السنتين اللي ماضيين، في اكثر من وحده منهم كانت هايبرفايزر اسكيب، انه الاتاكر فات على الفيرتشوال ماشين وتمكن بطريقه معينه انه يطلع من هاي الفيرتشوال ماشين ويفوت على الهوست. طبعا اذا فات على الهوست صار عنده اكسس على الشبكه كامله اللي موجوده في البيت، وصار ممكن يحط كريبتو مالوير، صار بامكانه انه يعمل يسحب داتا اللي بدك اياه. يعني مثلا فيرتشوال بوكس اخر CVE طلعت عنه بهي الناحيه كانت انه استعملوا الفيرتشوال فلوبي ديسك كنترولر اللي موجود جوا فيرتشوال بوكس، لانه ما حدا بيستعمله وما حدا عم بيطلع عليه. الكود كثير قديم، وبهذيك الايام لما انكتب الكود ما كانوا يسالوا عن السكيورتي، فتمكن انه يستعمل الفيرتشوال فلوبي ديسك كنترولر انه يعمل ياخذ اكسس كامل على الجهاز اللي هو عليه. فاحنا الهدف منا من هوم لاب من ناحيه السكيورتي انه نعطي لحالنا اكسترا لاير، اللي هو ماشي انا بشتغل هايبرفايزر بالسيستمز تبعتي، ولكن في برضه عندي فاير وول عشان في حاله الكود اللي انا بشتغل عليه او الكود اللي بعمل عليه ريسيرش، خلينا نحكي هرب من الهايبرفايزر، على الاقل ما يفوتش على النتورك عندي. هلا من ناحيه اوبريشنز، الهوم لاب بفيدنا عن الفيرتشوال ماشينز انه لما بتشتغل كيبلات بايدك، لما بتشتغل اكثر من ماشين يكونوا connected through a switch، يعني مشبوكين على بعض بسويتش فيزيكال، هذا بيفرجيك شغلات الهايبرفايزر ما راح يفرجيك اياها. الهايبرفايزر راح يعطيك بيرفكت نتورك بين الاجهزه تبعتك، بينما الهوم لاب راح يفرجيك المشاكل اللي راح تمر معك في البرودكشن. واحده من الشغلات اللي حكى لي اياها السيستم ادمنستريتور اللي تعلمت على ايده، انه حتى لو انك ما بتشبك كيبلات بايدك، اطلع على التكنيشن شو بيشتغل وكيف بيشبك بيعمل الكيبلات الار جي 45 مشان تعرف كيف بيشتغل، مشان لما بتصير في اي مشكله تعرف تلاقي او تعرف تعمل حل لها. طيب هلا اذا احنا بدنا نشتري اجهزه للهوم لاب تبعنا، مش هي الاجهزه رح تكلف؟ يعني اذا بنطلع على النكست جنريشن فايروولز اللي الشركات عم تشتريها من سيسكو او جونيبر، حقها يعني بنحكي بعشرات ومئات الالاف في منها. والشخص العادي اكيد، يعني انا عفوا عدم المؤاخذه ما راح اقدر اشتري فاير وول ب $10,000، هذا شيء طبيعي. بس بنفس الوقت الاشخاص اللي زينا الريكوايرمنتس تبعتهم اكثر ليونه. يعني في عندنا احنا ما لازم نعطي السيرفيسز تبعتنا للببليك، فحتى لو طفينا الاجهزه كلها اللي عندنا موجوده ما صار علينا مشكله. عدد المستخدمين للشبكات تبعتنا في العاده مش راح يكون اكثر من 10 اشخاص اللي هم اللي موجودين في البيت. واذا انا طفيت الانترنت في هذيك اللحظه او طفيت الشبكه، شو راح يصير؟ ماشي، الكل راح يتضايق بس مش اخر الدنيا، فكل شيء عندنا يعني بمشي. فبامكاننا انه نروح باتجاه اقل او ب هاردوير وسوفت وير ارخص من اللي موجود في الشركات، لانه كمان احنا في عندنا، خلينا نحكي، معنا فاينانشال ديتا على الاقل موجوده في السيستمز تبعتنا اللي لازم يكون عندنا هذا المستوى الحمايه اللي موجود في الشركات. فاذا بنطلع شو ارخص طريقه ممكن نبني فيها هوم لاب؟ هذا الجراف اللي قدامكم كونفيجريشن بنسميه 3 دم راوترز. شو الهدف منه؟ اذا بتطلعوا على الراوتر اللي موجود هون على الشمال اللي هو السكيور راوتر، هذا بنعتبره اللي هي النتورك اللوكال تبعت البيت اللي بنشبك عليها لابتوباتنا، بنشبك موبايلاتنا، وبنشبك الاستورج تبعتنا اللي فيها الشغلات تبعتنا. وبنجيب الاي او تي راوتر اللي بنشبك عليه الاجهزه اللي احنا ما بنثق فيها. السمارت بلاج ما حدا بيعرف اذا بينعمل له ابديت للسوفت وير ولا لا. ممكن يشبك على سيرفرات برا يعمل عليها للكنترول تبعها، بيضطر يشبك برا عشان نقدر نتحكم بهذا البلاج عن طريق التليفون. بس احنا ما بنعرف مقدار السكيورتي اللي موجود في هذا البلاج، فممكن باي لحظه يصير له كومبرومايز، خصوصي انه عم بفتح شانل ما برا. طب احنا هيك شو عملنا؟ لنفرض انه انا عندي النتورك هاي الاي بي رينج تبعها 192.168.0/24، وهي النتورك 192.168.1.0/24، والنتورك تبعت البوردر راوتر 172.168.1.0/24. بهي الحالة الويب كام هي حتى لو صار عليها كومبرومايز، بالنسبة لها الاي بيز اللي موجودة هون نون راوتبل، يعني ما بقدر يوصل لها. فأنا على الأقل حميت الجزء تبع البرايفت نتورك تبعي من الاي او تي ديفايسز. فبهي الحالة على الأغلب الكل عندنا موجود عنده راوترات قديمة زيادة بقدر يحطها فيها النتورك تبعته ويبلش شغل، إذا ما كان قادر إنه يشتري أجهزة خصوصي لهذا الحكي. بنفس الوقت إحنا كلنا بنشتغل بشركات، وهي الشركات كل كم من سنة بتبدل الهاردوير تبعها. ممكن نروح للإدارة نحكي لهم هذا الهاردوير اللي بدكم تحطوه على جنب في مجال آخده، رح أعمل فيه 1 2 3 4، ولما بدكم إياه برجعه. طبعا ما حدا ياخذ هاردوير بدون ما يحكي، حتى لو الهاردوير هذا لا يستعمل. بس الفكرة إنه الهاردوير هذا موجود بالشركة، انتربرايز ليفل، يعني اذا انا في عندي سويتشات سيسكو قديمه موجوده بالمكتب والاداره سمحت لي اني اخذهم على البيت، طريقه الشغل اللي راح اشتغلها على سويتشات السيسكو هاي راح تكون مطابقه لسويتشات السيسكو اللي موجوده بالشغل، حتى لو انه سويتشات السيسكو اجدد من اللي موجوده. وبنفس الوقت ممكن نستعمل اجهزتنا القديمه، كل كم من سنه ما احنا بنبدل الجهاز ممكن ناخذ الهاردوير القديم ونستعمله. طيب هلا لو بامكاننا انه نشتري اجهزه جديده شو ممكن نسوي؟ مثلا ممكن ناخذ كاستم بيلت بي سي نستعمله كفاير وول. الكاستم بيلت بي سي هذا ممكن يكون مستعمل ممكن يكون جديد. بنستعمل عليه سوفت وير مثل بي اف سنس او او بي ان سنس، ممكن نستعمل اوبن دبليو ار تي او لينكس او بي اس دي. انا شخصيا بي اف سنس هو الاوبريتنج سيستم المفضل عندي للفاير وولز، بس مشكلته انه عشان نحطه على هاردوير، الهاردوير هذا لازم يكون شوي غالي، فما بقدر انصح فيه للكل. فخلينا نطلع على الاوبشنز الثانيه. مثلا في عندنا بي سي انجنز بيصنعوا سنجل بورد كمبيوترز، هدول السنجل بورد كمبيوترز ممكن انزل عليهم لينكس او بي اس دي واستعملهم انا كفاير وول، وممكن انزل عليهم بي اف سنس، بس مشكلتهم انه مش افيلبل بكل مكان بالعالم. الرازبيري باي صارت موجوده في كل مكان في العالم، واذا بنطلع على هاي الصوره اللي موجوده هون، هذول شركه اسمهم دي اف روبوت، عملوا بسموها نتورك هات تنحط على رازبيري باي. بصير في عندي تو نتورك انترفيسز زياده بقدر استعملهم، وممكن استعمل الرازبيري باي او اس واعمل منه راوتر. هلا هذا ما راح يكون كثير كيبل كراوتر، بس حلو انه الواحد يتعلم عليه، وممكن الواحد يبدا فيه كبدايه لانه رازبيري باي سهل انه نحصلها. هلا ممكن برضه نروح مع اوبشنز تجاريه مثل يوبيكويتي ومثل ميكروتك. انا من اخر سنتين تقريبا بلشت اروح مع ميكروتك، لانه الحلو فيهم ببلش الهاردوير تبعهم من تقريبا 65 دينار اردني زي الراوتر الهكس اللي موجود هون، وموجودين بشركه بعمان بجبل عمان بتبيعهم، وبتقدر تطلع من الهكس للديفايسز الاكبر. الحلو فيها انه السوفت وير نفسه من اصغر جهاز لاكبر جهاز، بس بصفي الليميتيشن عندك اللي هو الهاردوير. اذا انت مثلا بدك تشغل شركه ما بنفع تمشيها على هيكس، بس اذا بدك تمشي بيت كافي جدا حتى لو كان الكونكشن عندك جيجا بت. وممكن انه احنا نستعمل فيرتشوال ابلاينس. اذا عندي انا سيرفر منزل عليه بروكسموكس مثلا، ممكن اجيب له كارت ايثرنت او فيه مالتيبل ايثرنت بورتس، بحطه وبشغل فيرتشوال ماشين وبحط فيها بي اف سنس. هلا اعتراضي الوحيد على استعمال الفيرتشوال ابلاينس انه باي لحظه بدك توقف الفيرتشواليزيشن سيرفر تبعك بطل عندك انترنت، سواء بدك تعمل صيانه، سواء بدك تعمل ابديت، اي شيء مثل هذا بطل في عندك انترنت. ولكن هو كليرنينج تول عشان نتعلم احنا كيف نعمل سيت اب لفاير وولز وخصوصي بي اف سنس، الفيرتشوال ابلاينس شيء كثير منيح. ولكن انا بنصح يعني شخصيا بالميكروتك. الانترفيس تبعهم شوي سيء، ولكن متى ما اشتغل بيشتغلوا كل اموره تمام. طيب هلا ليش احنا مثلا بدنا نروح مع بي اف سنس، مع ميكروتك، مع يوبيكويتي، مع اي واحد من هدول الفاير وولز مقارنه بالثريدم راوترز اللي هو الكنترول؟ هلا لنفرض انه بالنص عندنا هون الفاير وول تبعنا، سواء كان اي واحد فيهم، لانه بالاخر كلهم بيأدوا نفس الغرض. انا بامكاني اني اقسم النتورك تبعتي للان واي او تي والهوم لاب والدي ام زي، وممكن انا بهي الحاله احكي له مثلا اني احط الدي ان اس سيرفر تبعي في الدي ام زي، واسمح للهوم لاب واللان والاي او تي انه يوصلوا للدي ام زي. وممكن اني احط مثلا ميل سيرفر في الدي ام زي، واسمح بكونكشن جاي من الانترنت انه يوصل للميل سيرفر تبعي على بورت 25 او بورت 587 عشان الميل ديليفري، بس غير هيك لا. بهي الحالة أنا بمنع، ممكن أحكي له الاي او تي نتورك ما توصل لللان، الهوم لاب ما يوصل لللان، بس اللان تقدر توصل للاي او تي نتورك وتقدر توصل للهوم لاب. بهذا الحكي بصفي احنا كيف بدنا نبني النتورك تبعتنا وكيف بدنا نعمل الكونفيجريشن النهائي. عشان نبني الهوم لاب بدنا سويتشز شوي ادفانسد. مشكلة تي بي لينك مثلا اللي هو مش الأومادا العاديين، الابديتس. لما بتطلع على سويتش تي بي لينك او دي لينك او نت جير فيهم VLAN سبورت او فيهم ميرورينج سبورت، رح تلاقي انه اجدد فيرموير لهم كثير قديم. فيفضل انه نطلع شوي على، خلينا نحكي اللي بسموهم البروسيومر ديفايسز، ومثلا مثل تي بي لينك اومادا واليوبيكويتي وميكروتك وانجينيوس. سويتش زي هذا ما راح يكون سعره في عمان اتخيل اكثر من 70-80 دينار، وبالكابابيلتيز تبعته برضه شيء كثير منيح. اذا مثلا لقينا عندنا في البيت راوتر قديم بياخذ اوبن دبليو ار تي، برضه ممكن نستعمله لهي الشغله. بس انا شخصيا رحت مع ميكروتك لانه يوبيكويتي، مع انه الانترفيس تبعهم كثير اسهل والمانجمنت تبعهم بتم سنترلايزد، يعني لو عندك 20 ديفايس يوبيكويتي بتقدر تعملها ادمنستريشن بالمكان واحد. بس باول السنه صار عندهم سكيورتي بريتش وصارت عندهم كثير مشاكل، فقررت اني اوحد كل الشغل تبعي على ميكروتك. هلا بالنسبه للاكسس بوينتس، الحلو بالبروسيومر اكسس بوينتس زي يوبيكويتي وانجينيوس وميكروتك انه بتعطيني اكسس اني اعمل VLANs حتى على الواي فاي، وبيكون عندي كلاينت ايسوليشن. من فتره انا كان عندي اليوبيكويتي نانو اتش دي عملت لي مشاكل، فحولت على انجينيوس معطيتني توتال ايسوليشن بين كل الاي او تي ديفايسز، فانا عندي نتورك واحده للاي او تي وبعمل السيبريشن تبعها من الواي فاي. وبرضه في عندي النتورك تبعتي العاديه وكله بيشتغل عن طريق VLANs مع السويتش والفايروول اللي موجود. هلا بحب احكي عن هي الاكسس بوينت من ميكروتك. اذا ملاحظين قد ايه حجمها صغير، هاي مش كثير باورفول، بتشتغل بس 2.4 جيجا هرتز، فالسبيد تبعتها مش كثير كويسه. ولكن زي ما حكيت لكم عن السوفت وير تبع ميكروتك، كل الفيتشرز اللي موجوده في السوفت وير موجوده في هاي، فاحنا بامكاننا انه نستعملها كهوم لاب واي فاي، ونحط عليها فاير وول ونحط عليها راوتينج اللي يمشينا في هذيك الحاله. اذا ما كانش عندنا مثلا اكسس بوينت كبيره نحط عليها كل الفيلانس تبعتنا. بالنسبه للكمبيوت ممكن نروح مع كلاود. في عندنا هيتسنر، في عندنا AWS، في عندنا لاينود، في عندنا ديجيتال اوشن. كل واحدة فيهم إلها محاسنها وإلها مساوئها. مثلا AWS عندهم كتير سيرفيسز وفيري ادفانسد وبيعملوا انفراستراكشرز كتير حلوة، ولكن بنفس الوقت مكلفة. هيتسنر رخيصة، بتعطيني اوبشنز كتير منيحة، بإمكاني أنزل عليها مثلا كاستم اوبريتنج سيستمز بطريقة سهلة، ولكن مشكلتها بالنسبة لي أنها بس موجودة في أوروبا. لاينود وديجيتال اوشن او لاينود خلينا نحكي موجوده في كل العالم، بس مشكلتها ما بقدر انزل عليها الا لينكس، ما بقدر انزل عليها فري بي اس دي. ديجيتال اوشن موجوده في كل العالم، بتعطيني كل الاوبريتنج سيستمز اللي انا بدي اياها، ولكن بحطوا كاستمرز اكثر من غيرهم على الهاردوير اللي موجود، فالبرفورمانس تبعهم اقل شوي من الباقي. طيب هلا اذا بدنا نروح مع اون بريم كومبيوت، ممكن ناخذ PC قديم كان موجود عندنا نعمل له ابجريد للهارد ديسك للرام ونشغله كفيرتشواليزيشن. ممكن كبدايه ناخذ لابتوب قديم ونستعمله. اول PFSense ماشين حطيتها عندي بالبيت بعمان كانت لابتوب قديم، وكانت تعطيني كل اللي بدي اياه من النتورك تبعتنا. ممكن نروح مع التايني ميني او مايكرو بي سيز من الفندرز المختلفه زي هون ما شايفين من لينوفو. هاي صوره لبروكسموكس كلاستر على 3 مايكرو ماشينز من لينوفو موجوده. اذا بتروح على storagereview.com ممكن تشوفوها، او ممكن حتى نستعمل راسبيري باي. الصوره هاي اللي موجوده لراسبيري باي كلاستر كنت عم ببنيه ل proof of concept بدي اعمله، بس للاسف ما صح لي اكمل. هلا لاني بدي اتعلم كوبرنيتيز ودوكر، هذا الكلاستر راح يكون كثير مفيد بالنسبه لي. بالنسبه للستورج شو ممكن نستعمل؟ ممكن نستعمل تروناس على كاستم بيلد بي سي. الستورج اللي عندي مبنيه بهي الكيس زي اللي موجوده هون. ممكن نستعمل سينولوجي او كيوناب، بس كيوناب انا ابدا ما بنصح فيها لانه في عليهم كثير مشاكل سكيورتي صارت باخر سنتين. او حتى ممكن نبني احنا الستورج كامله من راسبيري باي. اذا مستعد انك تشوف الديفايسز تبعتك او الهارد ديسكات موجوده مرميه بجنب الراسبيري باي وما عندكش مشاكل فيها، برضه هذا حل حلو مشان الواحد يتعلم. سينولوجي شو الادفانتج تبعتها؟ زي ما انتم شايفين هذا هو حجم الهارد ديسك، فحجم الديفايس كامل كتير صغير. كصوت تقريبا ما له لما بيشتغل. بيعملوا كتير ريسيرش اند ديفلوبمنت على السوفت وير تبعهم، ففي عندهم كتير بلجنز حلوه على الكنترول بانل تبعتهم. حتى في عندهم هايبرفايزر جوا الستورج. بس مشكلتهم او اكبر مشكلتين بالنسبه لهم السي بي يوز تبعت الستورجز هاي كتير ضعيفه، ففعليا ما بتقدر تعمل عليها كتير فيرتشواليزيشن. وثاني مشكله ما بنقدر نصلحها، اذا ضرب البورد تبعها كل الستورج هاي بدنا نكبها ونجيب غيرها، وهي هاي كستورج مكلفه مش رخيصه. بينما لما بنروح مع كاستم بي سي يعني رح يكون ارخص شوي من سينولوجي، ولكن بنفس الوقت اذا ضرب مثلا السي بي يو بقدر اروح اشتري سي بي يو ثاني واركبه. ضربت المذر بورد بفك المذر بورد وبركب بدالها، ما بضطر اني ارمي كل شيء وارد اشتري من اول وجديد. خلينا نطلع على سيناريو لكلاود بيست هوم لاب. زي ما انتم شايفين هون هي النتورك الموجوده في البيت، وفي عندي هذا الراوتر لنفرض انه ميكروتك. وفي عندي الثلاث اجهزه هدول او 3 سيرفرات هدول اللي بدي اشغل عليهم سيرفيس معينه. خلينا نحكي ويب كلاستر. بامكاني اني اعمل سيت اب ل IPsec تانل بين الراوتر تبعي وجهاز موجود باللوكيشن تبعي بلاينود مثلا، وعن طريق البرايفت لان تبعتي اني اعمل اكسس على الاجهزه هدول. اي واحد بيحاول يفوت من الببليك انترنت على السيرفرات ما راح يقدر، لانه اوريدي انا عامل كنترول عليها. لانه ما حدا بيعرف شو ممكن يطلع فيه vulnerabilities، فانا اذا مش مضطر اني افتح هاي السيرفيس بابليك لا ما في داعي اني افتحها. وهلا بنحكي عن اخر ليفل ممكن نستعمله بالسكيورتي تبعتنا اللي هي الدي ان اس بيست سكيورتي. في اكثر من جهه بتوفر هيك سيرفيسز. احنا في سيرا في عندنا برودكت اسمه كنديان شيلد، هذا انا من التيم اللي بيشتغل عليه. هذا الكنديان شيلد مشان يعطي انترنت امنه ما بين برايفسي عشان ما حدا يعرف ايش الاماكن اللي بتفوت عليها او المواقع اللي بتفوت عليها، لانه شركات الانترنت بالعاده بتاخذ لست المواقع اللي بتفوت عليها وبتبيعها لمسوقين وممكن يصير في عليها بريتش اوف برايفسي، فاحنا ما بنحب. الاوبشن الثاني انه احنا نحمي حالنا من المالوير والفيشنج والماليشيوس ويب سايتس. والاوبشن الثالث هو الفاميلي فريندلي انترنت. برضه زي اي سيرفيس، في سيرفيسز زي الكنديان شيلد موجوده مجانيه، وفي سيرفيسز زي مثلا cleanbrowsing.org في عندهم فيتشرز اكثر، بس بنفس الوقت لهم اشتراك. بنيجي هلا للنتورك توبولوجي اللي بستعمله انا في الهوم لاب تبعي. في عندي هنا سويتش، هذا السويتش ميكروتك. زي ما حكيت لكم بحب اخر فتره حابب ميكروتك وبشتغل فيها كثير. وفي عندي هنا فايروول ميكروتك، ومن الفايروول هذا عامل 2 IPsec tunnels، واحده ل AWS بمونتريال وواحده ل AWS بلندن. وبالبيت عندي بعمان برضه في عندي فايروول ميكروتك عامل منه IPsec VPN على ال AWS بلندن. والسويتش اللي موجود هو سويتش يوبيكويتي. اللان اللي موجوده هناك 192.168.0.0/24. النتوركس اللي موجوده بالبيت هون عندي اللان اللي هي 192.168.0/24 لكل الاجهزه. الاي او تي مثلا ثيرموستات والكاميرا اللي موجوده على باب البيت موجودين على هي النتورك. هلا لو الديفايسز وايرد كان بحكي لكم صغروا النتوركس هي شوي بحيث الاجهزه ما تتعامل مع بعض او ما تقدر تشوف بعض، بحاله صار كومبرومايز للثيرموستات الكاميرا ما تتاثر، او صار كومبرومايز للكاميرا الثيرموستات ما يتاثر. بس لانه كله شغال وايرلس وعندي اوريدي كلاينت ايسوليشن مفعل على الاكسس بوينت، فمش كثير فارقه معي، هيك الكونفيجريشن اسهل. وموجود عندي هنا دي ام زي. هاي الدي ام زي حاليا موجود فيها رازبري باي، بس مشغل عليها دي ان اس. الدي ان اس هذا بيعمل شويه كنترول زياده عن اللي بيعمله كنديان شيلد، وبرضه بيعمل لي كاشنج للريكوستس اللي بتتودع على كنديان شيلد مشان تكون الدي ان اس ريزولفينج عندي اسرع. هلا بعدين شو عامل؟ عن طريق التو اي بي سك تانلز هذول باني جي ار اي تانل، فبامكاني من هون اللان اشبك على الدي ام زي وعلى الاي او تي وعلى اللان اللي موجوده بعمان. اللان اللي موجوده في عمان ممكن تشبك على اللان اللي موجوده هون عندي بكندا، بس ما بتقدر تشبك على الاي او تي، ما بتقدر تشبك على الدي ام زي. فهذا بيعطيكم مثال كيف ممكن انا اعمل ريستريكشن للترافيك اللي جوا النتورك تبعتي. طب هلا ال AWS نودز هدول اللي انا حاططهم، ليش حطيتهم في البدايه؟ في عندي اكم من سيرفر بعمل عليها تيست بهتسنر، وفي عندي اكم من سيرفر بعمل عليها تيست ب لاينود بتورنتو. هلا هدول شو بدي اعمل فيهم عشان افوت عليهم سكيورلي وما ما افتح ريموت اكسس لهم من وين ما كان؟ هدول التو ماشينز الاي بيز تبعتهم ستاتيك، ولاني بشبك عليهم اي بي سك فهدول سكيور. انا بس سامح لهم اي بي سك من الفاير وول تبع اي دبليو اس. وبعدين انا حاطط ليست على الفاير وول هون عندي على الميكروتك انه اذا بدي اشبك على الماشين اللي موجوده ب المانيا تبعت هاتسنر مرق لي الترافيك من الاي دبليو اس بلندن. اذا بدي اشبك على الماشين اللي موجوده بلاينود بتورنتو مرق لي الكونكشن عن طريق اي دبليو اس مونتريال. فهذا خلاني اعمل كنترول اكثر على الريموت اكسس اللي بوصل لاينود والريموت اكسس اللي بيوصل هاتسنر. في عندي هلا ديمو سريعه عن تيرافورم اذا بتحبوه. ما بعرف في معنا مجال يا جماعه ولا لا؟
اكيد
معنا مجال.
يا معناته خليني اعمل ديمو سريعه. هلا اذا بنطلع على الكود اللي موجود هنا، ما راح كثير افوت في التفاصيل، بس هذا الكود بيعمل سيت اب ل انجن اكس او اباتشي على ماشين بنفتحها على لاينود. هون انا بفتح سيرفرات بنزل عليها انجن اكس، وهون بفتح سيرفرات بنزل عليها اباتشي. وهذا الكود بيخليني اعمل لود بالانسر بين كل النودز اللي عليها اباتشي واللي عليها انجن اكس. هلا هذا الديمو الصغير بفرجينا شو الاشي اللي ممكن نعمله احنا بتيرافورم. هون انا حاطط عندي، انا في عندي 3 ماشينز انجن اكس و3 ماشينز اباتشي. فلو اروح هلا واحكي له Terraform apply، شو راح يفرجيني؟ راح يفرجيني انه في 13 ريسورس بدها تنبنى. بحكي له يس. قبل ما ابني راح افرجيكم هون زي ما انتم شايفين لاينود ما فيها اي ماشين. لو بحكي له يس راح نبلش نشوف هون هاي 2 ماشينز لاباتشي انفتحت و3 ماشينز لانجن اكس انفتحت. هلا اذا ردينا طلعنا هون راح نشوف انه بس كل اللي بعمله انا انه يا بنزل يا اباتشي يا انجن اكس، وبحكي له اكتب لي اسم النود بالديفولت اندكس فايل تبع الويب سيرفر اللي بده ينعمل. فهلا بس بدنا نستنى عليهم ثواني ليفتحوا. هلا هذا ايش بيفيدنا؟ اذا انا بس بشتغل على الهوم لاب تبعي ساعه في اليوم، فانا بامكاني ابنيه واطفيه او ابنيه واهده بسرعه، فما بضطر اني ادفع الكوست تبع الهوم لاب لكل الشهر. لا، انا بامكاني بالساعه اللي بشتغلها ببني السيرفرات، بعمل عليها التستنج اللي بدي اياه، بجرب كل شيء وبس اخلص بطفيها. هاي زي ما انتم شايفين ابلاي كومبليت، الخمسه في امز اشتغلوا. النود بالانسر اللي انبنى بده شوي ليبين انه كل السيرفرات اب. بس لو اجينا على هون واخذنا مثلا هاد ورحنا فتنا عليه، بدها شوي وقت لتطلع. بدنا نشوف واحدة من نودز الانجن اكس. هاي الانجن اكس الاولى فتحت، نجرب الثانية لسه ما خلصت. هاي الثالثة، هاي الثالثة. هاي سيرفرات الانجن اكس الثلاثة طلعت. لو نرد نفوت على الاباتشي نشوف شو صار فيها. هاي الاباتشي الاولى اشتغلت، واذا نشوف الثانية هاي اشتغلت. اذا بنرجع على النود بالانسر نعطيه شوية صغيرة، هاي زي ما احنا شايفين بنينا انفراستراكشر صغيرة فيها 3 سيرفرات انجن اكس وفيها سيرفرين اباتشي ولود بالانسر. وزي ما احنا شايفين اللود بالانسر عم بيشتغل. قد ايه اخذت منا الانفايرمنت عشان تنبنى؟ تقريبا دقيقة ونص او دقيقتين. وعشان خلصنا من هاي الانفايرمنت بدنا نحكي له Terraform destroy، نحكي له يس. نرجع هون بتقريبا نص دقيقة راحت الانفراستراكشر من عنا زي ما انتم شايفين. فبرضه هاي طريقة اللي نخفف الكوست تبعنا، بس بنفس الوقت تعطينا كثير فلكسبيليتي بالشغل. إذا في أي أسئلة.
شكرا كثير محمد، كثير كان توبيك حلو صراحة. علاء شايفك
عندي سؤال سريع.
تفضل.
يا توك حلو كثير. بالنسبة للانفراستراكشر اللي انت عملت لها سيت اب هلا، الاي بيز publicly accessible، في عندك recommendations كيف مثلا لما تعمل سيت اب للانفراستراكشر وتعمل bootstrap للانفراستراكشر انه تكون مثلا الاي بيز only accessible by the load balancer and then the load balancer only accessible by مثلا specific IPs؟
هلا بيعتمد على الكلاود بروفايدر اللي بتشتغل معه. AWS باي ديفولت ما بسمح لك تشبك على الماشينز publicly، لازم انت على الفايروول تحكي له افتح اكسس ل 1 2 3 4. نفس الشيء هون بلاينود في عندنا الفايروول. برضه بنفس الوقت انا بامكاني اني احكي له انه بس اسمح الكلاود فايروول تبعي او لللود بالانسر تبعي انه يشبك، وغير هيك ما تسمح لاي حدا ثاني. بس بصراحه هذا الديمو حطيته على السريع، كان الهدف منه انه افرجي كيف بنبني الانفراستراكشر وبننزلها بسرعه. ما حطيت فيه موضوع السكيورتي.
تمام. شكرا.
نعم.
في اسئله اياد؟
في سؤال على سلايد 18 محمد. Is there a way to configure several VLANs in your home office and still use one Wi-Fi SSID to connect to these devices belonging to these VLANs?
هلا اذا
سؤال من فارس مسمار.
هلا بالنسبه لنا احنا لما بيكون SSID وحده، المشكله في الانكابسوليشن اللي بيصير انه عشان تشبك على الاكسس بوينت هاي لازم انت تكون عارف الباسورد تبعتها. ففي هاي الحاله اذا انت عارف الباسورد تبعتها، كل الترافيك اللي راح يمشي في الهواء او في الوايرلس نتورك كل الكلاينتس بيقدروا يشوفوه. فماشي انا ممكن اني اعمل كونفيجريشن للاي بيز مختلفه واخلي الترافيك ما يبين بين النتوركس هاي، بس واحد حاطط في باله الموضوع وبده يقرا الترافيك هذا راح يقدر يقراه. بس لما نطلع على الاكسس بوينتس اللي اكبر شوي مثل يوبيكويتي مثل انجينيوس، هذول بيعطوني امكانيه اني اعمل اكثر من SSID. كل SSID فيهم راح يكون له باسورد مختلفه. الديفايس عشان يشبك على الاي او تي نتورك ما بيعرف بالمره شو الترافيك اللي بيمشي بالنتوركس الثانيه. هلا لما بيوصل الترافيك للاكسس بوينت عن طريق الواي فاي، الاكسس بوينت بهذيك الحاله بتمرقه بالفيلان الديديكيتد تبعته، وبهي الحاله انا عملت كومبليت ايسوليشن بين التو نتوركس هذول، ما بين الاي او تي واللان تبعتي.
طيب خلاص ان شاء الله يكون الجواب واضح. اذا في عندك اي سؤال كمان اسالنا. ما في اي سؤال من الشات. محمد انا عندي سؤال. لا بتعرف احنا دائما بنعمل ابجريد للانترنت، يعني كونكشن عندنا في البيت، ومرات بكون عندنا 4G راوتر، مرات بكون عندنا حتى واي ماكس راوتر ايام زمان، مرات نغير البروفايدر من بروفايدر لبروفايدر. فهدول الراوترز do you still انه برضه usable and can be used also for home labs حسب.
هلا اللي بيصير في العاده حسب
يوجوالي بتكون كودد او فيها مثلا كود من البروفايدر نفسه.
هلا في عندك طريقتين. بعض البروفايدرز بيسمح لك انك تحول المودم او الراوتر اللي بيعطيك اياه لشيء بنسميه بريدج، فبصفي بيشتغل زي كانه مودم. وبهي الحاله انت بتعمل مثلا PPPoE كونكشن او كونفيجريشن على الراوتر تبعك الرئيسي، ومنه بتطلع انترنت. الاوبشن الثاني اللي هو اذا البروفايدر تبعك بيعطيك هالبوكس وبيحكي لك ما بتقدر تغير عليه شيء، والبوكس هذا هو اللي بيعمل الراوتنج، ومثلا بيعطيك نتورك خلينا نحكي اللي هي بالعاده 192.168.1.0/24. الراوتر تبعك او الفاير وول تبعك بتعمل الكونفيجريشن تبعه يا اما ستاتيك اي بي او دي اتش سي بي على النتورك ال 192.168.0، وبعدين بتسوي النتورك بالكونفيجريشن اللي حكيناه. هلا بهي الحاله شو بصير عندك؟ لما بتطلع الترافيك تبعتك من اللان للفاير وول تبعك رح يصير في اول نات، لما توصل الراوتر تبع البروفايدر رح يصير نات كمان مره ورح يطلع. بس بهي الحاله بدك عشان اذا بدك تستقبل الترافيك بدك تشغل فيتشر الدي ام زي بالراوتر تبع البروفايدر اللي يصير يمرق كل الترافيك اللي جايه على الفاير وول تبعك. بس بتنعمل، بس يعني مش كتير حلو الكونفيجريشن بيكون، بس دوبل.
تمام.
أنا عندي سؤال محمد، بالنسبة للكنديان شيلد نقدر نستخدمه من الأردن ولا يعني تروت عليه ولا بس بكندا؟
بتقدر تستخدميه من الأردن، رح يكون بطيء شوي، فعشان هيك بهي الحالة يفضل إنك تحطي كاشنج دي ان اس سيرفر عندك في البيت اللي بتقدر تستعملي الكنديان شيلد.
ما دام هي يعني اتس جفرمنتال انستيتيوت صح؟ اللي يكون اتس بروفايدد، فلازم يكون في عندنا امل بالمستقبل يكون عندنا بالاردن شيء زي هيك كمان صح؟ ولا شو رايك بالموضوع؟
يعني نتمنى، ما بقدر
نتمنى بذلك. يعني اول شيء خطر على بالي اذا بدنا نحكي عن ممكن هذا يكون جزء من الافكار اللي ممكن تطلع من الكونفرنس، انه نقدم هذا الشيء يعني للتوصيات او اي اقتراحات كمان، لانه شيء حكومي اكيد رح يفيد الناس مش بس السكيورتي بروفيشنالز از ا برودكت.
بالضبط.
موضوع الاكسس ليست والكنترولينج وات يو اكسبوز فروم يور نتورك، يعني اللي حكاه علاء برضه يعني امبورتنت، برضه مش على الكلاود، برضه امبورتنت انترنال. يعني في كيس مره انه you can search على specific router number from ISP in Jordan، مثلا تعمل سيرش على shodan.io، في هذا this kind of router معروف المانجمنت انترفيس فيها default hard coded credentials. ف if you expose your management interface للاكسترنال بيكون accessible وسيرشبل على شودن مثلا، ف يعني this is very critical، وكان accessible و you can see what's the ايش الباسورد تبعت الانترنال وايرلس نتورك. ف I think yes it is very important to know what، يعني it's worth حتى تعمل سكان على حالك، تعمل what you know what you expose what you are vulnerable to.
بالضبط. هلا الميكروتك صار عليهم مشاكل من 2 أو من 3 سنين، انه في كان عندهم insecure defaults. فهلا اذا بتدور على الويكي تبعهم رح تلاقي hardening procedure. هاي البروسيجر بتلغي كل الفاير وول رولز اللي موجوده باي ديفولت على الفاير وول، وبتبنيها بطريقه سكيور اكثر، انه ما فيش اي شيء اكسبوزد لبرا. مثلا يو بي ان بي مسكر او ديسيبلد، حتى اللي لا يقدر لا ديفايس لا من برا ولا جوا يقدر يفتحه. ودائما احنا لازم نمشي مع نسكر كل شيء وبس نسمح للترافيك اللي بدنا اياها. ف زمان لما بلشوا يعملوا امبلمنتيشن للفاير وولز كانوا يسكروا اول شيء الباد بورتس، اكتشفوا الاي اس بيز بعدين انه هذا الحكي ما بينفع، وانه احنا لازم نسكر كل شيء وبعدين بس نفتح للشغلات اللي احنا بدنا اياها. يعني مثلا زي ما حكيت بالسلايد تبعي، كل الترافيك من بين النتوركس ممنوع الا الدي ان اس ترافيك للدي ام زي، والاس اس اتش اكسس او الاكسس من اللان لكل الفي لانز الثانيه، بس غير هيك كل شيء مسكر. طبعا من الانترنت كله مسكر، لانه حتى لو انت بتثق بكل السيرفيسز اللي موجوده عندك مثل بلكس مثلا، والها ابديتس والها يعني دايرين بالهم الجماعه على السكيورتي، بس بنفس الوقت ما بتعرف شو ممكن يصير، وهي السيرفيس مش مضطر انها تكون publicly available، فما في داعي انها نخليها publicly available. وبنفس الوقت اذا انا مثلا بدي احضر من البلكس تبعي من برا البيت، احسن سوليوشن اعمله اني اشبك في بي ان على البيت واحضر من هناك، بس مش اني افتح الاكسس على البلكس سيرفر تبعي يكون public.
Yes absolutely. تمام. طب موضوع ثاني، انا مره سمعت يعني one of the يعني known security researcher بيحكي لك I don't host PHP code في in my home يعني بروح aggressive يعني تعرف PHP شويه فيه sometimes يعني في كثير vulnerabilities يعني ك programming language ك scripting language، ف يعني هو رايح aggressive بيقول I don't host PHP code. وشو رايك انت من وجهه نظرك محمد؟
إذا ما له داعي لا تستعمله. بس هلا مثلا خلينا نحكي عن نكست كلاود أو أون كلاود. طريقة برايفت وسكيور إنك تعمل هوستنج للفايلات تبعتك ولا الكونتاكتس تبعتك لوكالي في البيت عندك، فأنت هيك بصير عندك كومبليت اكسس على الكونتنت هذا. طيب اون كلاود او نكست كلاود الاثنين مكتوبين بي اتش بي، واذا انت بدك تعمل عليهم اكسس من برا انت فتحت على حالك باب مش لطيف. اسهل شيء ممكن تعمله انك تحمي حالك بهي الحاله انه بس تحط ريفرس بروكسي قدامهم وتحط بيسك اوثنتيكيشن اللي هو اللي لما بتفوت على الويب سايت انت مش مرات بيطلع لك بوب اب صغيره تدخل يوزر نيم وباسورد، مش اللي بتكون انتجريتد جوا الصفحه وبكون شكلها حلو. لا، الدايلوج بوكس اللي بيطلع هذا بنسميه بيسك اوثنتيكيشن. البيسك اوثنتيكيشن هذا الامبلمنتيشن تبعه كثير سهل وما له دخل ببي اتش بي وما له دخل بشيء، والنون فولنربيلتيز عليه كثير قليله. فانت بالبدايه بتحط اليوزر نيم والباسورد تبعين البيسك اوثنتيكيشن، بعدين بتفوت بتحط اليوزر نيم والباسورد تبعين اون كلاود ونكست كلاود. ف يعني ما بنقدر نحكي انه ما بصير تستعمل بي اتش بي، لا، البي اتش بي لها استعمالاتها والنود لها استعمالاتها وبايثون لها استعمالاتها، كله له استعماله. اذا انت محتاج هي السيرفيس ولقيت لها الترناتيف غير البي اتش بي ماشي، لقيت الترناتيف، بس اذا ما في غير بي اتش بي بيعمل لك الشيء اللي انت بدك اياه فانت مضطر انك تستعمل بي اتش بي.
يس.
محمد، في عندي سؤال.
تفضل.
في ناس بتسال مثلا عم بيدرسوا اوفنسيف سكيورتي او ايثيكال هاكينج، بدهم يعملوا مثلا لاب تو براكتس بنتريشن تيستينج اشياء هاي، فبرضه ايش تنصحهم بالنسبه للناس حابين يعملوا هذا اللاب في البيت؟
بامكانهم يبدوا بلابتوب قديم يشغلوا عليه الفي امات اللي بيشتغلوا عليها، بس يكون بنتورك منفصله تماما عن نتورك البيت، لانه اخر شيء بدك اياه انه كريبتو مالوير يفلت من اللاب تبعك ويفوت على النتورك تبعت البيت ويشفر لك كل شيء.
عندي سؤال ثاني محمد. بالنسبة الفيلان سبنت اللي بتحط عليها الكاميراز، هلا في مثلا سوفت ويرز او هاردويرز بتطلبوا انه انت تشبك على الانترنت عشان يضل يعمل ابديت، رايت؟ اند بدك هذا الشيء عشان السكيورتي. so تحط مثلا specific egress rules على هاي الراوتر على اساس انه only specific like the camera can only talk to specific ports, ولا you don't care about that in general.
هلا اهم شيء احنا بدنا اياه من هون انه الكاميرا هاي نفصلها عن كل شيء موجود عندنا في البيت. فجوا الفيلان في عندي كلاينت ايسوليشن، فجوا الفيلان الكاميرا ما عم بتشوف شيء، ما بتشوف اللان تبعتي، فاي كومبرومايز بصير على الكاميرا هاي كونتيند في الكاميرا، ما بتقدر تشوف اي شيء ثاني في البيت. هلا بصفي بالاخر على الكاميرا تبعتك اذا هي بتقدر انها تشتغل بريستريكتد رولز ولا ما تشتغل بريستريكتد رولز، وبهي الحاله بدك تروح مع بروفايدر يكون ريبيوتبل، مثلا يوفي او رينج، ما تروح مع الشغلات اللي ارخص اللي فعليا ما بنعرف شو هي. فبكون بالدوكيومنتيشن عندك شو الاكسس ليست المطلوبه، وبهي الحاله انت بتحطها.
تمام. وبالنسبه للبرودكشن سيرفرز، اذا صار في كومبرومايز مثلا على البرودكشن سيرفرز، الاتاكرز كان بصير عندهم اكسس على IPsec certificates, right? Private keys. Can they still access your home lab?
الاكسس بالكونفيجريشن اللي موجود عندي بس اوتسايد، ما في كونكشن راجع لبرا. هلا اذا بدك تعمل كونكشن راجع لبرا بتقدر تعمل هيك، بس بهي الحاله يفضل انك تحطه في الدي ام زي مشان بحاله صار عليه كومبرومايز يكون كونتيند جوا الدي ام زي، ما يفوت على اللان تبعتك.
تمام.
هلا لو انا مثلا بدي اعمل هوستنج للميل سيرفر تبعي، الدي ام زي تبعتي ما بتكون /24 بتكون /30 اللي بيكون فيها بس 2 اي بيز، اللي هو اي بي السيرفر اللي بدي استعمله بلس اي بي الجيت واي. في حاله صار اي كومبرومايز الجيت واي او الفاير وول بيوقف اي كوميونيكيشن بصير بين السيرفر واي شيء ثاني بحاول يوصله. البرودكاست دومين تبعي بيكون كثير صغير، فالسيجمنت اللي بصير عليها الاتاك بتكون كثير صغيره.
تمام، شكرا محمد.
أهلا.
طيب محمد، في عندي سؤال من نديم بيسأل: Would you recommend using Raspberry Pi clusters for VMware ESXi projects and training? Would you recommend using Raspberry Pi's clusters for VMware ESXi projects and training?
هلا مشكلة الراسبيري باي شوي البروسيسنج باور تبعها ضعيف، فبفضل إذا بدك تعمل، وبعرفش بصراحة إذا بيشتغل أصلا الفي ام وير على الراسبيري باي، لأنه في ام وير معمول للانتل وراسبيري باي ارم. فإحنا بهي الحالة ممكن لو رحنا مع لابتوبات قديمة أو أجهزة صغيرة زي اللي فرجتكم إياها بالصورة بكون أحسن من الراسبيري باي. الراسبيري باي أكثر إذا بدك تستعملها لدوكر وكوبرنيتيز.
خلصنا الأسئلة، ما ضل عندنا أسئلة من
Someone has raised his hand. مش عارف السؤال.
آخر سؤال من نديم كان هلا سألنا عن راسبيري باي.
تمام.
هيك معناته احنا وصلنا لنهاية اليوم التوك دايز تبعنا. بنحب نشكركم جميعا علاء ومازن ومحمد. كانت مواضيع صراحة مفيدة ومهمة، وكتير سعيدين كمان انه احنا عاملين ريكوردينج له، لانه كتير في ناس عم بيسألونا عن الريكوردينج للسيشنز. وكمان كتير حضرونا ناس على يوتيوب وعلى فيسبوك كمان لايف، هدول بس ما بعتوا أسئلة يعني، بس حضور. كان فروتفل بوقت كتير صعب، يوم سبت مساء بعد ما خلص الكرفيو وكل الناس عم تطلع بعمان ما حدا مستني يحضر virtual conference. However, it was really pleasure to have you, and we still have another day tomorrow طبعا for the workshops. لكل الحضور اللي معنا هلا او اللي registered. بكره التو workshops عليهم high hits كمان واتنديز وريجسترد registrants. اللي مسجلين للوركشوب تبع الديفسك ابس، توقعوا انه المفروض وصلكم الايميلات تاعون الفيرتشوال لاب، وللويندوز فورنزكس مع دكتور علي كمان الفي ام از افيلبل. فاذا اي حدا ما نزلها هلا يعني it's better to do it now، لانه راح يتاخر الوقت، بدها وقت يعني it's a big image. وبس نشوفكم بكره ونشكركم مجددا. ما بعرف رامي واياد اذا حابين تحكوا شيء.
شكرا محمد، ختامها مسك يعني وان شاء الله بنشوفك السنه الجايه بلكي.
ان شاء الله تعالى.
بس مش اخر توك، السنه الجايه.
هو عشان التوقيت كمان لانه بكندا محمد.
صاحبي امين،
استمتعت شخصيا انا بالتوك وثانك يو فيري ماتش. ثانك يو.
وبحب اشكر كل الحضور كمان اللي كانوا معنا وسالوا هذا. وفي عندنا بكره الويندوز فورنزكس وركشوب راح تكون برضه لايف ستريم. فاذا برضه انترستد يشوف بدون ما يجرب الفي ام وير، بدون ما ينزل الفي ام وير، بحب يحضر كمان هذا التوك وركشوب، عفوا بيقدر يحضرها لايف ان شاء الله.
يعطيك العافيه.
شكرا
جميعا، مع السلامه.
مع السلامه.
باي.